Question 93, Part 1 of Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Adam Taylor. Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on Man, by Saint Thomas Aquinas. Translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican Province. Question 93. The end or term of the production of man, in 9 articles. Part 1. We now treat the end of the term of man's production, inasmuch as he is said to be made to the image and likeness of God. There are under this head 9 points of inquiry. 1. Whether the image of God is in man. 2. Whether the image of God is in irrational creatures. 3. Whether the image of God is in the angels more than in man. 4. Whether the image of God is in every man. 5. Whether the image of God is in man by comparison with the essence, or with all the divine persons, or with one of them. 6. Whether the image of God is in man as to his mind only. 7. Whether the image of God is in man's power or in his habits and acts. 8. Whether the image of God is in man by comparison with every object. 9. Of the difference between image and likeness. First article, Section 1, Question 93, Article 1. Whether the image of God is in man. Objection 1. It would seem that the image of God is not in man, for it is written, Isaiah 40:18, To whom have you likened God, or what image will you make for him? Objection 2. Further, to be the image of God is the property of the first begotten, of whom the Apostle says, Colossians 1:15, who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature. Therefore the image of God is not to be found in man. Objection 3. Further, Hilary says, on the Councils, on the first canon of the Council of Ancyra, that an image is of the same species as that which it represents. And he also says that an image is the undivided and united likeness of one thing adequately representing another. But there is no species common to both God and man, nor can there be a comparison of equality between God and man. Therefore there can be no image of God in man. On the contrary, it is written, Genesis 1:26, Let us make man to our own image and likeness. I answer that, as Augustine says, on 83 diverse questions, question 74, where an image exists, there forthwith is likeness, but where there is likeness, there is not necessarily an image. Hence it is clear that likeness is essential to an image, and that an image adds something to likeness, namely, that it is copied from something else. For an image is so called because it is produced as an imitation of something else. Wherefore, for instance, an egg, however much like and equal to another egg, is not called an image of the other egg because it is not copied from it. But equality does not belong to the essence of an image, for as Augustine says, on 83 diverse questions, question 74, where there is an image there is not necessarily equality, as we see in a person's image reflected in a glass. Yet this is of the essence of a perfect image, for in a perfect image nothing is wanting that is to be found in that of which it is a copy. Now it is manifest that in man there is some likeness to God, copied from God as from an exemplar. Yet this likeness is not one of equality, for such an exemplar infinitely excels its copy. Therefore there is in man a likeness to God, not indeed a perfect likeness, but imperfect. And Scripture implies the same when it says that man was made to God's likeness, for the preposition to signifies a certain approach, as of something at a distance. Reply to Objection 1. The prophet speaks of bodily images made by man. Therefore he says pointedly, What image will you make for him? But God made a spiritual image to himself in man. Reply to Objection 2. The firstborn of creatures is the perfect image of God, reflecting perfectly that of which he is the image, and so he is said to be the image, and never to the image. But man is said to be both image by reason of the likeness, and to the image by reason of the imperfect likeness. And since the perfect likeness to God cannot be except in an identical nature, the image of God exists in his firstborn Son, as the image of the King is in his Son, who is of the same nature as himself, whereas it exists in man as in an alien nature, as the image of the King is in a silver coin, as Augustine explains in On the 10 Strings, Sermon 9, otherwise 96, on the liturgical seasons. Reply to Objection 3. As unity means absence of division, a species is said to be the same as far as it is one. Now a thing is said to be one not only numerically, specifically, or generically, but also according to a certain analogy or proportion. In this sense a creature is one with God, or like to him. But when Hilary says, of a thing which adequately represents another, this is to be understood of a perfect image. Second Article, Section 1, Question 93, Article 2. Whether the image of God is to be found in irrational creatures. Objection 1. It would seem that the image of God is to be found in irrational creatures. For Dionysius says, Divine Names 2, effects are contingent images of their causes. But God is the cause not only of rational, but also of irrational creatures. Therefore the image of God is to be found in irrational creatures. Objection 2. Further, the more distinct a likeness is, the nearer it approaches to the nature of an image. But Dionysius says, Divine Names 4, that the solar ray has a very great similitude to the divine goodness. Therefore, it is made to the image of God. Objection 3. Further, the more perfect anything is in goodness, the more it is like God. But the whole universe is more perfect in goodness than man. For though each individual thing is good, all things together are called very good. Genesis 1:31. Therefore, the whole universe is to the image of God, and not only man. Objection 4. Further, Boethius, The Consolation of Philosophy 3, says of God, holding the world in his mind and forming it into his image. Therefore the whole world is to the image of God, and not only the rational creature. On the contrary, Augustine says, The Literal Meaning of Genesis 6:12, man's excellence consists in the fact that God made him to his own image by giving him an intellectual soul, which raises him above the beasts of the field. Therefore, things without intellect are not made to God's image. I answer that not every likeness, not even what is copied from something else, is sufficient to make an image. For if the likeness be only generic, or existing by virtue of some common accident, this does not suffice for one thing to be the image of another. For instance, a worm, though from man it may originate, cannot be called man's image, merely because of the generic likeness. Nor, if anything is made white like something else, can we say that it is the image of that thing, for whiteness is an accident belonging to many species. But the nature of an image requires likeness in species. Thus the image of the king exists in his son, or at least in some specific accident, and chiefly in the shape. Thus we speak of a man's image in copper. Whence Hilary says pointedly that an image is of the same species. Now it is manifest that specific likeness follows the ultimate difference. But some things are like to God first, and most commonly because they exist. Secondly, because they live. And thirdly, because they know or understand. And these last, as Augustine says, on 83 Diverse Questions, question 51, approach so near to God in likeness, that among all creatures nothing comes nearer to him. It is clear, therefore, that intellectual creatures alone, properly speaking, are made to God's image. Reply to Objection 1. Everything imperfect is a participation of what is perfect. Therefore even what falls short of the nature of an image, so far as it possesses any sort of likeness to God, participates in some degree the nature of an image. So Dionysius says that effects are contingent images of their causes, that is, as much as they happen, contingit, to be so, but not absolutely. Reply to Objection 2. Dionysius compares the solar ray to divine goodness as regards its causality, not as regards its natural dignity, which is involved in the idea of an image. Reply to Objection 3. The universe is more perfect in goodness than the intellectual creature as regards extension and diffusion, but intensively and collectively the likeness to the divine goodness is found rather in the intellectual creature, which has a capacity for the highest good. Or else we may say that a part is not rightly divided against the whole, but only against another part. Wherefore, when we say that the intellectual nature alone is to the image of God, we do not mean that the universe in any part is not to God's image, but that the other parts are excluded. Reply to Objection 4. Boethius here uses the word image to express the likeness which the product of an art bears to the artistic species in the mind of the artist. Thus every creature is an image of the exemplar type thereof in the divine mind. We are not, however, using the word image in this sense, but as it implies a likeness in nature, that is, inasmuch all things, as being, are like to the first being, as living, like to the first life, and as intelligent, like to the supreme wisdom. Third Article, Section 1, Question 93, Article 3. Whether the angels are more to the image of God than man is. Objection 1. It would seem that the angels are not more to the image of God than man is. For Augustine says in a sermon on the image, 43, on the words of the Apostles, 27, that God granted to no other creature besides man to be to his image. Therefore it is not true to say that the angels are more than man to the image of God. Objection 2. Further, according to Augustine, on 83 Diverse Questions, question 51, man is so much to God's image that God did not make any creature to be between him and man, and therefore nothing is more akin to him. But a creature is called God's image so far as it is akin to God. Therefore the angels are not more to the image of God than man. Objection 3. Further, a creature is said to be to God's image so far as it is of an intellectual nature. But the intellectual nature does not admit of intensity or remissness, for it is not an accidental thing, since it is a substance. Therefore the angels are not more to the image of God than man. On the contrary, Gregory says, Homily 34 on the Gospels, the angel is called a seal of resemblance, Ezekiel 28:12, because in him the resemblance of the divine image is wrought with greater expression. I answer that we may speak of God's image in two ways. First, we may consider in it that in which the image chiefly consists, that is, the intellectual nature. Thus, the image of God is more perfect in angels than in man, because their intellectual nature is more perfect, as is clear from what has been said. Question 58, Article 3, Question 79, Article 8. Secondly, we may consider the image of God in man as regards its accidental qualities, so far as to observe in man a certain imitation of God, consisting in the fact that man proceeds from man, as God from God, and also in the fact that the whole human soul is in the whole body, and again, in every part, as God is in regard to the whole world. In these and the like things, the image of God is more perfect in man than it is in the angels. But these do not of themselves belong to the nature of the divine image in man, unless we presuppose the first likeness, which is in the intellectual nature. Otherwise, even brute animals would be to God's image. Therefore, as in their intellectual nature, the angels are more to the image of God than man is. We must grant that, absolutely speaking, the angels are more to the image of God than man is, but that in some respects man is more like to God. Reply to Objection 1. Augustine excludes the inferior creatures bereft of reason from the image of God, but not the angels. Reply to Objection 2. As fire is said to be specifically the most subtle of bodies, while nevertheless one kind of fire is more subtle than another, so we say that nothing is more like to God than the human soul in its generic and intellectual nature, because, as Augustine had said previously, things which have knowledge are so near to him in likeness that of all creatures none are nearer. Wherefore this does not mean that the angels are not more to God's image. Reply to Objection 3. When we say that substance does not admit of more or less, we do not mean that one species of substance is not more perfect than another, but that one and the same individual does not participate in its specific nature at one time more than at another. Nor do we mean that a species of substance is shared among different individuals in a greater or lesser degree. Fourth Article, Section 1, Question 93, Article 4. Whether the image of God is found in every man. Objection 1. It would seem that the image of God is not found in every man. For the Apostle says that man is the image of God, but woman is the image, vulgate glory, of man. 1 Corinthians 11:7. Therefore, as woman is an individual of the human species, it is clear that every individual is not an image of God. Objection 2. Further, the Apostle says, Romans 8:29, whom God foreknew, he also predestined to be made conformable to the image of his Son. But all men are not predestined. Therefore, all men have not the conformity of image. Objection 3. Further, likeness belongs to the nature of the image, as above explained, Article 1. But by sin, man becomes unlike God. Therefore, he loses the image of God. On the contrary, it is written, Psalm 38:7, Surely man passeth as an image. I answer that, since man is said to be the image of God by reason of his intellectual nature, he is the most perfectly like God according to that in which he can best imitate God in his intellectual nature. Now the intellectual nature imitates God chiefly in this, that God understands and loves himself. Wherefore we see that the image of God is in man in three ways. First, inasmuch as man possesses a natural aptitude for understanding and loving God, and this aptitude consists in the very nature of the mind, which is common to all men. Secondly, inasmuch as man actually and habitually knows and loves God, though imperfectly, and this image consists in the conformity of grace. Thirdly, inasmuch as man knows and loves God perfectly, and this image consists in the likeness of glory. Wherefore, on the words, The light of thy countenance, O Lord, is signed upon us, Psalm 4:7, the gloss distinguishes a threefold image of creation, of recreation, and of likeness. The first is found in all men, the second only in the just, the third only in the blessed. Reply to Objection 1. The image of God, in its principal signification, namely the intellectual nature, is found both in man and in woman. Hence, after the words, To the image of God he created him, it is added, Male and female he created them. Genesis 1:27. Moreover, it is said them in the plural, as Augustine, the literal meaning of Genesis 3:22, remarks, lest it should be thought that both sexes were united in one individual. But in a secondary sense the image of God is found in man and not in woman, for man is the beginning and end of woman, as God is the beginning and end of every creature. So when the Apostle had said that man is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man, he adds his reason for saying this. For man is not of woman, but woman of man, and man was not created for woman, but woman for man. Reply to Objections 2 and 3. These reasons refer to the image consisting in the conformity of grace and glory. Fifth Article, Section 1, Question 93, Article 5. Whether the image of God is in man according to the Trinity of persons. Objection 1. It would seem that the image of God does not exist in man as to the Trinity of persons. For Augustine says, Fulgentius to Peter on the Faith, 1, "One in essence is the Godhead of the Holy Trinity, and one is the image to which man was made." And Hilary, on the Trinity, 5, says, "Man is made to the image of that which is common in the Trinity." Therefore the image of God in man is of the divine essence, and not of the Trinity of persons. Objection 2. Further, it is said, on the Dogmas of the Church, that the image of God in man is to be referred to eternity. Damascene also says, on the Orthodox Faith 2:12, that the image of God in man belongs to him as an intelligent being endowed with free will and self-movement. Gregory of Nyssa, on the Making of Man 16, also asserts that when Scripture says that man was made to the image of God, it means that human nature was made a participator of all good, for the Godhead is the fullness of goodness. Now all these things belong more to the unity of the essence than to the distinction of the persons. Therefore the image of God in man regards not the trinity of persons, but the unity of the essence. Objection 3. Further, an image leads to the knowledge of that of which it is the image. Therefore, if there is in man the image of God as to the trinity of persons, since man can know himself by his natural reason, it follows that by his natural knowledge man could know the trinity of the divine persons, which is untrue, as was shown above. Question 32, Article 1. Objection 4. Further, the name of image is not applicable to any of the three persons, but only to the Son. For Augustine says, on the Trinity 6:2, that the Son alone is the image of the Father. Therefore, if in man there were an image of God as regards the person, this would not be an image of the Trinity, but only of the Son. On the contrary, Hilary says, on the Trinity 4, the plurality of the divine persons is proved from the fact that man is said to have been made to the image of God. I answer that, as we have seen, question 40, Article 2, the distinction of the divine persons is only according to origin, or rather relations of origin. Now the mode of origin is not the same in all things, but in each thing is adapted to the nature thereof, animated things being produced in one way, and inanimate in another, animals in one way, and plants in another. Wherefore it is manifest that the distinction of the divine persons is suitable to the divine nature, and therefore to be to the image of God by imitation of the divine nature does not exclude being to the same image by the representation of the divine persons, but rather one follows from the other. We must therefore say that in man there exists the image of God, both as regards the divine nature and as regards the trinity of persons. For also in God himself there is one nature in three persons. Thus it is clear how to solve the first two objections. Reply to Objection 3. This argument would avail if the image of God in man represented God in a perfect manner. But as Augustine says, on the Trinity 15:6, there is a great difference between the Trinity within ourselves and the divine Trinity. Therefore, as he there says, we see rather than believe the Trinity which is in ourselves, whereas we believe rather than see that God is Trinity. Reply to Objection 4. Some have said that in man there is an image of the Son only. Augustine rejects this opinion, on the Trinity 12:5 and 6. First, because as the Son is like to the Father by a likeness of essence, it would follow of necessity if man were made in likeness to the Son, that he is made to the likeness of the Father. Secondly, because if man were made only to the image of the Son, the Father would not have said, "Let us make man to our own image and likeness," but "to thy image." When, therefore, it is written, "He made him to the image of God," The sense is not that the Father made man to the image of the Son only, who is God, as some explained it, but that the divine Trinity made man to its image, that is, of the whole Trinity. When it is said that God made man to his image, this can be understood in two ways. First, so that this preposition to points to the term of the making, and then the sense is, let us make man in such a way that our image may be in him. Secondly, this preposition to may point to the exemplar clause, as when we say, this book is made like to that one. Thus the image of God is the very essence of God, which is incorrectly called an image forasmuch as image is put for the exemplar. Or, as some say, the divine essence is called an image because thereby one person imitates another. End of question 93, Part 1. Recording by Adam Taylor, CatholicComposer.com. Question 93, Part 2 of Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Adam Taylor. Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on Man, by Saint Thomas Aquinas. Translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican Province. Question 93. The end or term of the production of man in 9 articles. Part 2. Sixth article. Section 1, Question 93, Article 6. Whether the image of God is in man as regards the mind only. Objection 1. It would seem that the image of God is not only in man's mind. For the Apostle says, 1 Corinthians 11:7, that the man is the image of God. But man is not only mind. Therefore, the image of God is to be observed not only in his mind. Objection 2. Further, it is written, Genesis 1:27, God created man to his own image. To the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. But the distinction of male and female is in the body. Therefore, the image of God is also in the body, and not only in the mind. Objection 3. Further, an image seems to apply principally to the shape of a thing. But shape belongs to the body. Therefore, the image of God is to be seen in man's body also, and not in his mind. Objection 4. Further, according to Augustine, the literal meaning of Genesis 12:7-24, there is a threefold vision in us, corporeal, spiritual or imaginary, and intellectual. Therefore, if in the intellectual vision that belongs to the mind there exists in us a trinity by reason of which we are made to the image of God, for the like reason there must be another trinity in the others. On the contrary, the Apostle says, Ephesians 4:23-24, Be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and put on the new man. Whence we are given to understand that our renewal, which consists in putting on the new man, belongs to the mind. Now he says, Colossians 3:10, putting on the new man, him who is renewed unto knowledge of God, according to the image of him that created him, where the renewal, which consists in putting on the new man, is ascribed to the image of God. Therefore, to be to the image of God belongs to the mind only. I answer that, while in all creatures there is some kind of likeness to God, in the rational creature alone we find a likeness of image, as we have explained above, Articles 1 and 2. Whereas in other creatures we find a likeness by way of a trace. Now the intellect or mind is that whereby the rational creature excels other creatures. Wherefore this image of God is not found even in the rational creature except in the mind, while in the other parts, which the rational creature may happen to possess, we find the likeness of a trace, as in other creatures to which, in reference to such parts, the rational creature can be likened. We may easily understand the reason of this if we consider the way in which a trace and the way in which an image represents anything. An image represents something by likeness in species, as we have said, while a trace represents something by way of an effect, which represents the cause in such a way as not to attain to the likeness of species. For imprints which are left by the movements of animals are called traces. So also ashes are a trace of fire, and desolation of the land a trace of a hostile army. Therefore we may observe this difference between rational creatures and others, both as to the representation of the likeness of the divine nature in creatures, and as to the representation in them of the uncreated Trinity. For as to the likeness of the divine nature, rational creatures seem to attain, after a fashion, to the representation of the species, inasmuch as they imitate God, not only in being and life, but also in intelligence, as above explained, Article 2. Whereas other creatures do not understand, although we observe in them a certain trace of the intellect that created them, if we consider their disposition. Likewise, as the uncreated Trinity is distinguished by the procession of the Word from the speaker, and of love from both of these, as we have seen, Question 28, Article 3, so we may say that in rational creatures, wherein we find a procession of the Word in the intellect, and a procession of love in the will, there exists an image of the uncreated Trinity, by a certain representation of the species. In other creatures, however, we do not find the principle of the Word, and the Word and love, but we do see in them a certain trace of the existence of these in the cause that produced them. For in the fact that a creature has a modified and finite nature, proves that it proceeds from a principle, while its species points to the mental word of the maker, just as the shape of a house points to the idea of the architect, and order points to the maker's love, by reason of which he directs the effect to a good end, as also the use of the house points to the will of the architect. So we find in man a likeness to God by way of an image in his mind, but in the other parts of his being by way of a trace. Reply to Objection 1. Man is called to the image of God, not that he is essentially an image, but that the image of God is impressed on his mind, as a coin is an image of the king, as having the image of the king. Wherefore there is no need to consider the image of God as existing in every part of man. Reply to Objection 2. As Augustine says, on the Trinity, 12:5, some have thought that the image of God was not in man individually, but severally. They held that the man represents the person of the Father, those born of man denote the person of the Son, and that the woman is a third person in likeness to the Holy Ghost, since she so proceeded from man as not to be his son or daughter. All of this is manifestly absurd. First, because it would follow that the Holy Ghost is the principle of the Son, as the woman is the principle of the man's offspring. Secondly, because one man would be only the image of one person. Thirdly, because in that case Scripture should not have mentioned the image of God in man until after the birth of the offspring. Therefore, we must understand that when Scripture had said, "To the image of God he created them," it added, "Male and female he created them," not to imply that the image of God came through the distinction of sex, but that the image of God belongs to both sexes, since it is in the mind, wherein there is no sexual distinction. Wherefore the Apostle, Colossians 3:10, after saying, "According to the image of him that created him," added, "where there is neither male nor female." These words are in reality from Galatians 3:28. In the Vulgate, neither Gentile nor Jew. Reply to Objection 3. Although the image of God in man is not to be found in his bodily shape, yet because the body of man alone among terrestrial animals is not inclined prone to the ground, but is adapted to look upward to heaven, for this reason we may rightly say that it is made to God's image and likeness, rather than the bodies of other animals, as Augustine remarks, on 83 Diverse Questions, question 51. But this is not to be understood as though the image of God were in man's body, but in the sense that the very shape of the human body represents the image of God in the soul by way of a trace. Reply to Objection 4. Both in the corporeal and in the imaginary vision we may find a trinity, as Augustine says, On the Trinity, 11:2. For in corporeal vision there is first the species of the exterior body, secondly the active vision, which occurs by the impression on the sight of a certain likeness of the said species, thirdly the intention of the will applying the sight to see, and to rest on what is seen. Likewise, in the imaginary vision, we find first the species kept in the memory, secondly the vision itself, which is caused by the penetrative power of the soul, that is, the faculty of imagination, informed by the species, and thirdly we find the intention of the will joining both together. But each of these trinities falls short of the divine image. For the species of the external body is extrinsic to the essence of the soul, while the species in the memory, though not extrinsic to the soul, is adventitious to it. And thus in both cases the species falls short of representing the co-naturality and co-eternity of the divine persons. The corporeal vision, too, does not proceed only from the species of the external body, but from this, and at the same time from the sense of the seer. In like manner, imaginary vision is not from the species only which is preserved in the memory, but also from the imagination. For these reasons, the procession of the Son from the Father alone is not suitably represented. Lastly, the intention of the will joining the two together does not proceed from them either in corporeal or spiritual vision. Wherefore the procession of the Holy Ghost from the Father and the Son is not thus properly represented. Seventh Article, Section 1, Question 93, Article 7. Whether the image of God is to be found in the acts of the soul. Objection 1. It would seem that the image of God is not found in the acts of the soul. For Augustine says, The City of God, 11:26, that man was made to God's image, inasmuch as we exist and know that we exist, and love this existence and knowledge. But to exist does not signify an act. Therefore the image of God is not to be found in the soul's acts. Objection 2. Further, Augustine, On the Trinity, 9:4, assigns God's image in the soul to these three things: mind, knowledge, and love. But mind does not signify an act, but rather the power or the essence of the intellectual soul. Therefore the image of God does not extend to the acts of the soul. Objection 3. Further, Augustine, On the Trinity, 10:11, assigns the image of the Trinity in the soul to memory, understanding, and will. But these three are natural powers of the soul, as the Master of the Sentences says, first sentence, D. 3. Therefore, the image of God is in the powers, and does not extend to the acts of the soul. Objection 4. Further, the image of the Trinity always remains in the soul, but an act does not always remain. Therefore, the image of God does not extend to the acts. On the contrary, Augustine, On the Trinity, 9:2 and following, assigns the Trinity in the lower part of the soul, in relation to the actual vision, whether sensible or imaginative. Therefore, also the Trinity in the mind, by reason of which man is like to God's image, must be referred to actual vision. I answer that, as above explained, Article 2, a certain representation of the species belongs to the nature of an image. Hence, if the image of the divine Trinity is to be found in the soul, we must look for it where the soul approaches the nearest to a representation of the species of the divine persons. Now the divine persons are distinct from each other by reason of the procession of the word from the speaker, and the procession of love connecting both. But in our soul, word cannot exist without actual thought, as Augustine says, On the Trinity, 14, 7. Therefore, first and chiefly, the image of the Trinity is to be found in the acts of the soul, that is, inasmuch as from the knowledge which we possess, by actual thought we form an internal word, and thence break forth into love. But since the principles of acts are the habits and powers, and everything exists virtually in its principle, therefore secondarily and consequently, the image of the Trinity may be considered as existing in the powers, and still more in the habits, forasmuch as the acts virtually exist therein. Reply to Objection 1. Our being bears the image of God so far as it is proper to us, and excels that of the other animals, that is to say, in so far as we are endowed with a mind. Therefore this Trinity is the same as that which Augustine mentions, On the Trinity 9:4, and which consists in mind, knowledge, and love. Reply to Objection 2. Augustine observed this Trinity first as existing in the mind, but because the mind, though it knows itself entirely in a certain degree, yet also in a way does not know itself, namely as being distinct from others, and thus also it searches itself, as Augustine subsequently proves, On the Trinity 10:3 and 4. Therefore, as though knowledge were not in equal proportion to mind, he takes three things in the soul which are proper to the mind, namely memory, understanding, and will, which everyone is conscious of possessing, and assigns the image of the Trinity preeminently to these three, as though the first assignation were in part deficient. Reply to Objection 3. As Augustine proves, On the Trinity 14:7, we may be said to understand, will, and to love certain things, both when we actually consider them, and when we do not think of them. When they are not under our actual consideration, they are objects of our memory only, which, in his opinion, is nothing else than habitual retention of knowledge and love. Compare Question 79, Article 7, Reply 1. But since, as he says, a word cannot be there without actual thought, for we think everything that we say, even if we speak with that interior word belonging to no nation's tongue, this image chiefly consists in these three things, memory, understanding, and will. And by understanding I mean here that whereby we understand with actual thought. And by will, love, or dilection, I mean that which unites this child with its parent. From which it is clear that he places the image of the divine Trinity more in actual understanding and will, than in these as existing in the habitual retention of the memory. Although even thus the image of the Trinity exists in the soul in a certain degree, as he says in the same place. Thus it is clear that memory, understanding, and will are not three powers as stated in the sentences. Reply to Objection 4. Someone might answer by referring to Augustine's statement, On the Trinity 14:6, that the mind ever remembers itself, ever understands itself, ever loves itself, which some take to mean that the soul ever actually understands and loves itself. But he excludes this interpretation by adding that it does not always think of itself as actually distinct from other things. Thus it is clear that the soul always understands and loves itself, not actually but habitually, though we might say that by perceiving its own act it understands itself whenever it understands anything. But since it is not always actually understanding, as in the case of sleep, we must say that these acts, although not always actually existing, yet ever exist in their principles, the habits and powers. Wherefore Augustine says, On the Trinity 14:4, if the rational soul is made to the image of God in the sense that it can make use of reason and intellect to understand and consider God, then the image of God was in the soul from the beginning of its existence. 8th Article, Section 1, Question 93, Article 8. Whether the image of the divine Trinity is in the soul only by comparison with God as its object. Objection 1. It would seem that the image of the divine Trinity is in the soul not only by comparison with God as its object. For the image of the divine Trinity is to be found in the soul, as shown above, Article 7, according as the word in us proceeds from the speaker, and love from both. But this is to be found in us as regards any object. Therefore the image of the divine Trinity is in our mind as regards any object. Objection 2. Further, Augustine says, on the Trinity, 12:4, that when we seek Trinity in the soul, we seek it in the whole of the soul, without separating the process of reasoning in temporal matters from the consideration of things eternal. Therefore the image of the Trinity is to be found in the soul, even as regards temporal objects. Objection 3. Further, it is by grace that we can know and love God. If, therefore, the image of the Trinity is found in the soul by reason of the memory, understanding, and will, or love of God, this image is not in man by nature, but by grace, and thus is not common to all. Objection 4. Further, the saints in heaven are most perfectly conformed to the image of God by the beatific vision. Wherefore it is written, 2 Corinthians 3:18, we are transformed into the same image from glory to glory. But temporal things are known by the beatific vision. Therefore the image of God exists in us even according to temporal things. On the contrary, Augustine says, on the Trinity, 14:12, the image of God exists in the mind, not because it has a remembrance of itself, loves itself, and understands itself, but because it can also remember, understand, and love God by whom it was made. Much less, therefore, is the image of God in the soul, in respect of other objects. I answer that, as above explained, Articles 2 and 7, image means a likeness which in some degree, however small, attains to a representation of the species. Wherefore we need to seek in the image of the divine Trinity, in the soul, some kind of representation of species of the divine persons, so far as this is possible to a creature. Now the divine persons, as above stated, Articles 6 and 7, are distinguished from each other according to the procession of the word from the speaker, and the procession of love from both. Moreover, the Word of God is born of God by the knowledge of himself, and love proceeds from God according as he loves himself. But it is clear that diversity of objects diversifies the species of word and love. For in the human mind the species of a stone is specifically different from that of a horse, which also the love regarding each of them is specifically different. Hence we refer the divine image in man to the verbal concept born of the knowledge of God, and to the love derived therefrom. Thus the image of God is found in the soul according as the soul turns to God, or possesses a nature that enables it to turn to God. Now the mind may turn towards an object in two ways, directly and immediately, or indirectly and mediately. As, for instance, when anyone sees a man reflected in a looking-glass, he may be said to be turned towards that man. So Augustine says, on the Trinity, 14:8, that the mind remembers itself, understands itself, and loves itself. If we perceive this, we perceive a Trinity, not indeed God, but nevertheless rightly called the image of God. But this is due to the fact, not that the mind reflects on itself absolutely, but that thereby it can furthermore turn to God, as appears from the authority quoted above. Argument on the contrary. Reply to Objection 1. For the notion of an image it is not enough that something proceed from another, but it is also necessary to observe what proceeds and whence it proceeds, namely, that what is the word of God proceeds from knowledge of God. Reply to Objection 2. In all the soul we may see a kind of Trinity, not, however, as though besides the action of temporal things and the contemplation of eternal things, any third thing should be required to make up the Trinity, as he adds in the same passage. But in that part of the reason which is concerned with temporal things, although a trinity may be found, yet the image of God is not to be seen there, as he says further on. Forasmuch as this knowledge of temporal things is adventitious to the soul. Moreover, even the habits whereby temporal things are known are not always present, but sometimes they are actually present, and sometimes present only in memory even after they begin to exist in the soul. Such is clearly the case with faith, which comes to us temporally for this present life, while in the future life faith will no longer exist, but only the remembrance of faith. Reply to Objection 3. The meritorious knowledge and love of God can be in us only by grace. Yet there is a certain natural knowledge and love as seen above. Question 12, Article 12, Question 56, Article 3, and Question 60, Article 5. This too is natural, that the mind, in order to understand God, can make use of reason, in which sense we have already said that the image of God abides ever in the soul. Whether this image of God be so obsolete, as it were clouded, as almost to amount to nothing, as in those who have not the use of reason, or obscured and disfigured, as in sinners, or clear and beautiful, as in the just, as Augustine says, On the Trinity 14:6. Reply to Objection 4. By the vision of glory, temporal things will be seen in God himself, and such a vision of things temporal will belong to the image of God. This is what Augustine means, On the Trinity 14:6, when he says that in that nature to which the mind will blissfully adhere, whatever it sees it will see as unchangeable, for in the uncreated Word are the types of all creatures. Ninth Article, Section 1, Question 93, Article 9. Whether likeness is properly distinguished from image. Objection 1. It would seem that likeness is not properly distinguished from image, for genus is not properly distinguished from species. Now likeness is to image, as genus to species, because where there is image, forthwith there is likeness, but not conversely, as Augustine says, on 83 Diverse Questions, Question 74. Therefore, likeness is not properly to be distinguished from image. Objection 2. Further, the nature of the image consists not only in the representation of the divine persons, but also in the representation of the divine essence, to which representation belong immortality and indivisibility. So it is not true to say that the likeness is in the essence because it is immortal and indivisible, whereas the image is in other things. Sentence 2, D. 16. Objection 3. Further, the image of God in man is threefold: the image of nature, of grace, and of glory, as above explained, Article 4. But innocence and righteousness belong to grace. Therefore it is incorrectly said, Sentence 2, D. 16, that the image is taken from the memory, the understanding and the will, while the likeness is from innocence and righteousness. Objection 4. Further, knowledge of truth belongs to the intellect, and love of virtue to the will, which two things are parts of the image. Therefore it is incorrect to say, Sentence 2, D. 16, that the image consists in the knowledge of truth, and the likeness in the love of virtue. On the contrary, Augustine says, on 83 Diverse Questions, Question 51, some consider that these two were mentioned not without reason, namely image and likeness, since if they meant the same, one would have sufficed. I answer that likeness is a kind of unity, for oneness in quality causes likeness, as the philosopher says, Metaphysics 5, Didascally 4:15. Now, since one is a transcendental, it is both common to all and adapted to each single thing, just as the good and the true. Wherefore, as the good can be compared to each individual thing, both as its preamble and as subsequent to it, as signifying some perfection in it, so also in the same way there exists a kind of comparison between likeness and image. For the good is a preamble to man, inasmuch as man is an individual good. And again, the good is subsequent to man, inasmuch as we may say of a certain man that he is good, by reason of his perfect virtue. In like manner, likeness may be considered in the light of a preamble to image, inasmuch as it is something more general than image, as we have said above, Article 1. And again, it may be considered as subsequent to image, inasmuch as it signifies a certain perfection of image. For we say that an image is like or unlike what it represents, according as the representation is perfect or imperfect. Thus, likeness may be distinguished from image in two ways. First, as its preamble and existing in more things, and in this sense, likeness regards things which are more common than the intellectual properties, wherein the image is properly to be seen. In this sense, it is stated, on 83 Diverse Questions, question 51, that the spirit, namely the mind, without doubt was made to the image of God. But the other parts of man, belonging to the soul's inferior faculties, or even to the body, are in the opinion of some made to God's likeness. In this sense, he says, on the measure of the soul, 2, that the likeness of God is found in the soul's incorruptibility, for corruptible and incorruptible are differences of universal beings. But likeness may be considered in another way, as signifying the expression and perfection of the image. In this sense Damascene says, on the Orthodox Faith, 2:12, that the image implies an intelligent being endowed with free will and self-movement, whereas likeness implies a likeness of power, as far as this may be possible in man. In the same sense, likeness is said to belong to the love of virtue, for there is no virtue without love of virtue. Reply to Objection 1. Likeness is not distinct from image in the general notion of likeness, for thus it is included in image. But so far as any likeness falls short of image, or again, as it perfects the idea of image. Reply to Objection 2. The soul's essence belongs to the image, as representing the divine essence in those things which belong to the intellectual nature, but not in those conditions subsequent to general notions of being, such as simplicity and indissolubility. Reply to Objection 3. Even certain virtues are natural to the soul, at least in their seeds, by reason of which we may say that a natural likeness exists in the soul. Nor is it unfitting to us the term image from one point of view, and from another the term likeness. Reply to Objection 4. Love of the Word, which is knowledge loved, belongs to the nature of image, but love of virtue belongs to likeness, as virtue itself belongs to likeness. End of question 93, Part 2. Recording by Adam Taylor, CatholicComposer.com.
Question 94 of Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on man, by Saint Thomas Aquinas. Translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican Province. Question 94. Of the state and condition of the first man as regards his intellect. In 4 articles. We next consider the state or condition of the first man. First, as regards his soul. Secondly, as regards his body. Concerning the first, there are 2 things to be considered. 1. The condition of man as to his intellect. 2. the condition of man as to his will. Under the first head, there are 4 points of inquiry. 1. Whether the first man saw the essence of God. 2. Whether he could see the separate substances, that is, the angels. 3. Whether he possessed all knowledge. 4. Whether he could err or be deceived. First Article, Part 1, Question 94, Article 1. Whether the first man saw God through his essence. Objection 1. It would seem that the first man saw God through his essence. For man's happiness consists in the vision of the divine essence. But the first man, while established in paradise, led a life of happiness in the enjoyment of all things, as Damascene says, On the Orthodox Faith 2:11. And Augustine says, The City of God 14:10, If man was gifted with the same tastes as now, how happy must he have been in paradise, that place of ineffable happiness. Therefore the first man in paradise saw God through his essence. Objection 2. Further, Augustine says, The City of God 14, in the place cited, that, the first man lacked nothing which his good will might obtain, But our good will can obtain nothing better than the vision of the divine essence. Therefore man saw God through his essence. Objection 3. Further, the vision of God in his essence is whereby God is seen without a medium or enigma. But man in the state of innocence, saw God immediately, as the Master of the Sentences asserts. Book of Sentences 4, Distinction 1. He also saw without an enigma, for an enigma implies obscurity, as Augustine says, On the Trinity 15:9. Now obscurity resulted from sin. Therefore man in the primitive state saw God through his essence. On the contrary, the Apostle says, 1 Corinthians 15:46, That was not first which is spiritual, but that which is natural. But to see God through his essence is most spiritual. Therefore the first man in the primitive state of his natural life did not see God through his essence. I answer that, the first man did not see God through his essence if we consider the ordinary state of that life, unless perhaps it be said that he saw God in a vision, when, God cast a deep sleep upon Adam, Genesis 2:21. The reason is because since in the divine essence is beatitude itself, the intellect of a man who sees the divine essence has the same relation to God as a man has to beatitude. Now it is clear that man cannot willingly be turned away from beatitude, since naturally and necessarily he desires it, and shuns unhappiness. Wherefore no man who sees the essence of God can willingly turn away from God, which means to sin. Hence all who see God through his essence are so firmly established in the love of God, that for eternity they can never sin. Therefore as Adam did sin, it is clear that he did not see God through his essence. Nevertheless he knew God with a more perfect knowledge than we do now. Thus, in a sense, his knowledge was midway between our knowledge in the present state and the knowledge we shall have in heaven when we see God through his essence. To make this clear, we must consider that the vision of God through his essence is contradistinguished from the vision of God through his creatures. Now, the higher the creature is, and the more like it is to God, the more clearly is God seen in it. For instance, a man is seen more clearly through a mirror in which his image is the more clearly expressed. Thus God is seen in a much more perfect manner through his intelligible effects than through those which are only sensible or corporeal. But in his present state, man is impeded as regards the full and clear consideration of intelligible creatures, because he is distracted by and occupied with sensible things. Now it is written, Ecclesiastes 7:30, "God made man right," and man was made right by God in this sense, that in him the lower powers were subjected to the higher, and the higher nature was made so as not to be impeded by the lower. Wherefore the first man was not impeded by exterior things from a clear and steady contemplation of the intelligible effects which he perceived by the radiation of the first truth, whether by a natural or by a gratuitous knowledge. Hence Augustine says, on the literal meaning of Genesis 11:33, that, "Perhaps God used to speak to the first man as he speaks to the angels, by shedding on his mind a ray of the unchangeable truth, yet without bestowing on him the experience of which the angels are capable in the participation of the divine essence." Therefore, through these intelligible effects of God, man knew God then more clearly than we know him now. Reply Obj. 1. Man was happy in paradise, but not with that perfect happiness to which he was destined, which consists in the vision of the divine essence. He was, however, endowed with "a life of happiness in a certain measure," as Augustine says, on the literal meaning of Genesis 11:18, so far as he was gifted with natural integrity and perfection. Reply Obj. 2. A good will is a well-ordered will, but the will of the first man would have been ill-ordered had he wished to have, while in the state of merit, what had been promised to him as a reward. Reply Obj. 3. A medium of knowledge is twofold, one through which, and at the same time in which, something is seen, as, for example, a man is seen through a mirror, and is seen with the mirror. Another kind of medium is that whereby we attain to the knowledge of something unknown, such as the medium in a demonstration. God was seen without this second kind of medium, but not without the first kind. For there was no need for the first man to attain to the knowledge of God by demonstration drawn from an effect, such as we need, since he knew God simultaneously in his effects, especially in the intelligible effects, according to his capacity. Again, we must remark that the obscurity which is implied in the word enigma may be of two kinds. First, so far as every creature is something obscure when compared with the immensity of the divine light, and thus Adam saw God in an enigma, because he saw him in a created effect. Secondly, we may take obscurity as an effect of sin, so far as man is impeded in the consideration of intelligible things by being preoccupied with sensible things, in which sense Adam did not see God in an enigma. Second Article, Part 1, Question 94, Article 2. Whether Adam in the state of innocence saw the angels through their essence. Objection 1. It would seem that Adam, in the state of innocence, saw the angels through their essence. For Gregory says, Dialogues 4:1, "In paradise man was accustomed to enjoy the words of God, and by purity of heart and loftiness of vision to have the company of the good angels." Objection 2. Further, the soul in the present state is impeded from the knowledge of separate substances by union with a corruptible body which "is a load upon the soul," as is written, Wisdom 9:15. Wherefore the separate soul can see separate substances, as above explained, Q. 89, Article 2. But the body of the first man was not a load upon his soul, for the latter was not corruptible. Therefore he was able to see separate substances. Objection 3. Further, one separate substance knows another separate substance by knowing itself. Book of Causes, 13. But the soul of the first man knew itself, therefore it knew separate substances. On the contrary, the soul of Adam was of the same nature as ours, but our souls cannot now understand separate substances. Therefore neither could Adam's soul. I answer that, the state of the human soul may be distinguished in two ways. First, from a diversity of mode in its natural existence, and in this point the state of the separate soul is distinguished from the state of the soul joined to the body. Secondly, the state of the soul is distinguished in relation to integrity and corruption, the state of natural existence remaining the same, and thus the state of innocence is distinct from the state of man after sin. For man's soul in the state of innocence was adapted to perfect and govern the body. Wherefore the first man is said to have been made into a "living soul," that is, a soul giving life to the body, namely animal life. But he was endowed with integrity as to this life, in that the body was entirely subject to the soul, hindering it in no way, as we have said above, Article 1. Now it is clear from what has been already said, Question 84, Article 7, Question 85, Article 1, Question 89, Article 1, that since the soul is adapted to perfect and govern the body, as regards animal life, it is fitting that it should have that mode of understanding which is by turning to phantasms. Wherefore this mode of understanding was becoming to the soul of the first man also. Now, in virtue of this mode of understanding, there are 3 degrees of movement in the soul, as Dionysius says, Divine Names 4. The first is by the soul, "passing from exterior things to concentrate its powers on itself." The second is by the soul ascending, "so as to be associated with the united superior powers," namely the angels. The third is when the soul is "led on," yet further, "to the supreme good," that is, to God. In virtue of the first movement of the soul from exterior things to itself, the soul's knowledge is perfected. This is because the intellectual operation of the soul has a natural order to external things, as we have said above, Question 87, Article 3. And so by the knowledge thereof, our intellectual operation can be known perfectly as an act through its object. And through the intellectual operation itself, the human intellect can be known perfectly as a power through its proper act. But in the second movement we do not find perfect knowledge, because, since the angel does not understand by turning to phantasms, but by a far more excellent process, as we have said above, Question 55, Article 2, the above-mentioned mode of knowledge by which the soul knows itself is not sufficient to lead it to the knowledge of an angel. Much less does the third movement lead to perfect knowledge. For even the angels themselves, by the fact that they know themselves, are not able to arrive at the knowledge of the divine substance by reason of its surpassing excellence. Therefore the soul of the first man could not see the angels in their essence. Nevertheless, he had a more excellent mode of knowledge regarding the angels than we possess, because his knowledge of intelligible things within him was more certain and fixed than our knowledge. And it was on account of this excellence of knowledge that Gregory says that, he enjoyed the company of the angelic spirits. This makes clear the reply to the first objection. Reply Obj. 2. That the soul of the first man fell short of the knowledge regarding separate substances was not owing to the fact that the body was a load upon it, but to the fact that its connatural object fell short of the excellence of separate substances. We, in our present state, fall short on account of both these reasons. Reply Obj. 3. The soul of the first man was not able to arrive at knowledge of separate substances by means of its self-knowledge, as we have shown above, for even each separate substance knows others in its own measure. Third Article. Part 1, Question 94, Article 3. Whether the first man knew all things. Objection 1. It would seem that the first man did not know all things. For if he had such knowledge, it would be either by acquired species, or by connatural species, or by infused species. Not, however, by acquired species, for this kind of knowledge is acquired by experience, as stated in Metaphysics 1:1, and the first man had not then gained experience of all things. Nor through connatural species, because he was of the same nature as we are, and our soul, as Aristotle says, On the Soul 3:4, is, quote, like a clean tablet on which nothing is written, end quote. And if his knowledge came by infused species, it would have been of a different kind from ours, which we acquire from things themselves. Objection 2. Further, individuals of the same species have the same way of arriving at perfection. Now other men have not, from the beginning, knowledge of all things, but they acquire it in the course of time, according to their capacity. Therefore neither did Adam know all things when he was first created. Objection 3. Further, the present state of life is given to man in order that his soul may advance in knowledge and merit. Indeed, the soul seems to be united to the body for that purpose. Now man would have advanced in merit in that state of life, therefore also in knowledge. Therefore he was not endowed with knowledge of all things. On the contrary, man named the animals, Genesis 2:20. But names should be adapted to the nature of things. Therefore Adam knew the animals' natures, and in like manner he was possessed of the knowledge of all other things. I answer that, in the natural order, perfection comes before imperfection, as act precedes potentiality. For whatever is in potentiality is made actual only by something actual. And since God created things not only for their own existence, but also that they might be the principles of other things, so creatures were produced in their perfect state to be the principles as regards others. Now man can be the principle of another man, not only by generation of the body, but also by instruction and government. Hence, as the first man was produced in his perfect state, as regards his body, for the work of generation, so also was his soul established in a perfect state to instruct and govern others. Now, no one can instruct others unless he has knowledge, and so the first man was established by God in such a manner as to have knowledge of all those things for which man has a natural aptitude. And such are whatever are virtually contained in the first self-evident principles, that is, whatever truths man is naturally able to know. Moreover, in order to direct his own life and that of others, man needs to know not only those things which can be naturally known, but also things surpassing natural knowledge, because the life of man is directed to a supernatural end, just as it is necessary for us to know the truths of faith in order to direct our own lives. Wherefore the first man was endowed with such a knowledge of these supernatural truths as was necessary for the direction of human life in that state. But those things which cannot be known by merely human effort, and which are not necessary for the direction of human life, were not known by the first man, such as the thoughts of men, future contingent events, and some individual facts, as for instance the number of pebbles in a stream, and the like. Reply Obj. 1. The first man had knowledge of all things by divinely infused species. Yet his knowledge was not different from ours, as the eyes which Christ gave to the man born blind were not different from those given by nature. Reply Obj. 2. To Adam, as being the first man, was due a degree of perfection which was not due to other men, as is clear from what is above explained. Reply Obj. 3. Adam would have advanced in natural knowledge, not in the number of things known, but in the manner of knowing, because what he knew speculatively he would subsequently have known by experience. But as regards supernatural knowledge, he would also have advanced as regards the number of things known, by further revelation, as the angels advance by further enlightenment. Moreover, there is no comparison between advance in knowledge and advance in merit, since one man cannot be a principle of merit to another, although he can be to another a principle of knowledge. Fourth Article, Part 1, Question 94, Article 4. Whether man in his first state could be deceived. Objection 1. It would seem that man in his primitive state could have been deceived, for the Apostle says, 1 Timothy 2:14, that, quote, "the woman being seduced was in the transgression," end quote. Objection 2. Further, the Master says, Book of Sentences 2, distinction 21, that, quote, "the woman was not frightened at the serpent speaking, because she thought that he had received the faculty of speech from God," end quote. But this was untrue. Therefore, before sin, the woman was deceived. Objection 3. Further, it is natural that the farther off anything is from us, the smaller it seems to be. Now the nature of the eyes is not changed by sin. Therefore this would have been the case in the state of innocence, wherefore man would have been deceived in the size of what he saw, just as he is deceived now. Objection 4. Further, Augustine says, on the literal meaning of Genesis 12:2, that in sleep the soul adheres to the images of things as if they were the things themselves, but in the state of innocence man would have eaten and consequently have slept and dreamed. Therefore he would have been deceived, adhering to images as to realities. Objection 5. Further, the first man would have been ignorant of other men's thoughts, and of future contingent events, as stated above, Article 3. So if anyone had told him what was false about these things, he would have been deceived. On the contrary, Augustine says, on Free Will 3:18, quote, "To regard what is true as false is not natural to man as created, but is a punishment of man condemned," end quote. I answer that, in the opinion of some, deception may mean two things, namely, any slight surmise in which one adheres to what is false, as though it were true, but without the assent of belief, or it may mean a firm belief. Thus, before sin, Adam could not be deceived in either of these ways, as regards those things to which his knowledge extended, but as regards things to which his knowledge did not extend, he might have been deceived, if we take deception in the wide sense of the term for any surmise without assent of belief. This opinion was held with the idea that it is not derogatory to man to entertain a false opinion in such matters, and that provided he does not assent rashly, he is not to be blamed. Such an opinion, however, is not fitting as regards the integrity of the primitive state of life, because, as Augustine says, De Civ. Dei 14:10, in that state of life, "sin was avoided without struggle, and while it remained so, no evil could exist." Now it is clear that as truth is the good of the intellect, so falsehood is its evil, as the Philosopher says, Ethic. 6:2. So that as long as the state of innocence continued, it was impossible for the human intellect to assent to falsehood as if it were truth. For as some perfections, such as clarity, were lacking in the bodily members of the first man, though no evil could be therein, so there could be in his intellect the absence of some knowledge, but no false opinion. This is clear also from the very rectitude of the primitive state, by virtue of which, while the soul remained subject to God, the lower faculties in man were subject to the higher, and were no impediment to their action. And from what has preceded, Question 85, Article 6, it is clear that as regards its proper object, the intellect is ever true, and hence it is never deceived of itself, but whatever deception occurs must be ascribed to some lower faculty, such as the imagination or the like. Hence we see that when the natural power of judgment is free, we are not deceived by such images, but only when it is not free, as is the case in sleep. Therefore it is clear that the rectitude of the primitive state was incompatible with deception of the intellect. Reply Obj. 1. Though the woman was deceived before she sinned indeed, still it was not till she had already sinned by interior pride. For Augustine says, on the literal meaning of Genesis 11:30, that, "the woman could not have believed the words of the serpent, had she not already acquiesced in the love of her own power, and in a presumption of self-conceit." Reply Obj. 2. The woman thought that the serpent had received this faculty, not as acting in accordance with nature, but by virtue of some supernatural operation. We need not, however, follow the master of the sentences in this point. Reply Obj. 3. Were anything presented to the imagination or sense of the first man not in accordance with the nature of things, he would not have been deceived, for his reason would have enabled him to judge the truth. Reply Obj. 4. A man is not accountable for what occurs during sleep, as he has not then the use of his reason, wherein consists man's proper action. Reply Obj. 5. If anyone has said something untrue as regards future contingencies, or as regards secret thoughts, man in the primitive state would not have believed it was so, but he might have believed that such a thing was possible, which would not have been to entertain a false opinion. It might also be said that he would have been divinely guided from above, so as not to be deceived in a matter to which his knowledge did not extend. If any object, as some do, that he was not guided when tempted, though he was then most in need of guidance, we reply that man had already sinned in his heart, and that he failed to have recourse to the divine aid. End of question 94. Question 95 of Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on man, by Saint Thomas Aquinas. Translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican Province. Question 95. Of things pertaining to the first man's will. namely, grace and righteousness, in 4 articles. We next consider what belongs to the will of the first man, concerning which there are 2 points of treatment. 1. The grace and righteousness of the first man. 2. The use of righteousness as regards his dominion over other things. Under the first head there are 4 points of inquiry. 1. Whether the first man was created in grace. 2. Whether in the state of innocence he had passions of the soul. 3. Whether he had all virtues. 4. Whether what he did would have been as meritorious as now. First article, Part 1, Question 95, Article 1. Whether the first man was created in grace. Objection 1. It would seem that the first man was not created in grace, for the Apostle, distinguishing between Adam and Christ, says, 1 Corinthians 15:45, quote, "The first Adam was made into a living soul, the last Adam into a quickening spirit." End quote. But the spirit is quickened by grace, therefore Christ alone was made in grace. Objection 2. Further, Augustine says, Questions on the Old and New Testaments, question 123, that, quote, "Adam did not possess the Holy Ghost," end quote. But whoever possesses grace has the Holy Ghost. Therefore Adam was not created in grace. Objection 3. Further, Augustine says, On Admonition and Grace, 10, that, quote, "God so ordered the life of the angels and men as to show first what they could do by free will, then what they could do by His grace and by the discernment of righteousness." End quote. God thus first created men and angels in the state of natural free will only, and afterwards bestowed grace on them. Objection 4. Further, the Master says, Book of Sentences 2, distinction 24, quote, "When man was created, he was given sufficient help to stand, but not sufficient to advance." End quote. But whoever has grace can advance by merit. Therefore the first man was not created in grace. Objection 5. Further, the reception of grace requires the consent of the recipient, since thereby a kind of spiritual marriage takes place between God and the soul. But consent presupposes existence. Therefore, man did not receive grace in the first moment of his creation. Objection 6. Further, nature is more distant from grace than grace is from glory, which is but grace consummated. But in man grace precedes glory. Therefore much more did nature precede grace. On the contrary, man and angel are both ordained to grace. But the angels were created in grace, for Augustine says, The City of God, 12:9, quote, "God at the same time fashioned their nature and endowed them with grace." End quote. Therefore man also was created in grace. I answer that, some say that man was not created in grace, but that it was bestowed on him subsequently before sin, and many authorities of the saints declare that man possessed grace in the state of innocence. But the very rectitude of the primitive state, wherewith man was endowed by God, seems to require that, as others say, he was created in grace, according to Ecclesiastes 7:30, quote, "God made man right." End quote. For this rectitude consisted in his reason being subject to God, the lower powers to reason, and the body to the soul, and the first subjection was the cause of both the second and the third, since, while reason was subject to God, the lower powers remained subject to reason, as Augustine says. Now it is clear that such a subjection of the body to the soul, and of the lower powers to reason, was not from nature, otherwise it would have remained after sin, since even in the demons the natural gifts remained after sin, as Dionysius declared, Divine Names 4. Hence it is clear that also the primitive subjection by virtue of which reason was subject to God was not a merely natural gift, but a supernatural endowment of grace. For it is not possible that the effect should be of greater efficiency than the cause. Hence Augustine says, The City of God 13:13, that, quote, as soon as they disobeyed the divine command and forfeited divine grace, they were ashamed of their nakedness, for they felt the impulse of disobedience in the flesh, as though it were a punishment corresponding to their own disobedience. End quote. Hence, if the loss of grace dissolved the obedience of the flesh to the soul, we may gather that the inferior powers were subjected to the soul through grace existing therein. Reply Obj. 1. The Apostle in these words means to show that there is a spiritual body, if there is an animal body, inasmuch as the spiritual life of the body began in Christ, who is, quote, the firstborn of the dead, end quote, as the body's animal life began in Adam. From the Apostle's words, therefore, we cannot gather that Adam had no spiritual life in his soul, but that he had not spiritual life as regards the body. Reply Obj. 2. As Augustine says in the same passage, it is not disputed that Adam, like other just souls, was in some degree gifted with the Holy Ghost, but, quote, he did not possess the Holy Ghost, as the faithful possess him now, end quote, who are admitted to eternal happiness directly after death. Reply Obj. 3. This passage from Augustine does not assert that angels or men were created with natural free will before they possessed grace, but that God shows first what their free will could do before being confirmed in grace, and what they acquired afterwards by being so confirmed. Reply Obj. 4. The Master here speaks according to the opinion of those who held that man was not created in grace, but only in a state of nature. We may also say that, though man was created in grace, yet it was not by virtue of the nature wherein he was created that he could advance by merit, but by virtue of the grace which was added. Reply Obj. 5. As the motion of the will is not continuous, there is nothing against the first man having consented to grace, even in the first moment of his existence. Reply Obj. 6. We merit glory by an act of grace, but we do not merit grace by an act of nature. Hence the comparison fails. Second Article, Part 1, Question 95, Article 2. Whether passions existed in the soul of the first man. Objection 1. It would seem that the first man's soul had no passions. For by the passions of the soul, quote, the flesh lusteth against the spirit, Galatians 5:7. But this did not happen in the state of innocence. Therefore, in the state of innocence, there were no passions of the soul. Objection 2. Further, Adam's soul was nobler than his body, but his body was impassible. Therefore, no passions were in his soul. Objection 3. Further, the passions of the soul are restrained by the moral virtues, but in Adam the moral virtues were perfect. Therefore, the passions were entirely excluded from him. On the contrary, Augustine says, The City of God, 14:10, that, quote, "in our first parents there was undisturbed love of God," end quote, and other passions of the soul. I answer that, the passions of the soul are in the sensual appetite, the object of which is good and evil. Wherefore some passions of the soul are directed to what is good, as love and joy, others to what is evil, as fear and sorrow. And since in the primitive state evil was neither present nor imminent, nor was any good wanting which a good will could desire to have then, as Augustine says, The City of God, 14:10, therefore Adam had no passion with evil as its object, such as fear, sorrow, and the like. Neither had he passions in respect of good not possessed, but to be possessed then, as burning concupiscence. But those passions which regard present good, as joy and love, or which regard future good to be had at the proper time, as desire and hope that casteth not down, existed in the state of innocence, otherwise, however, than as they exist in ourselves. For our sensual appetite, wherein the passions reside, is not entirely subject to reason. Hence, at times our passions forestall and hinder reason's judgment. At other times they follow reason's judgment, accordingly as the sensual appetite obeys reason to some extent. But in the state of innocence, the inferior appetite was wholly subject to reason, so that in that state the passions of the soul existed only as consequent upon the judgment of reason. Reply Obj. 1. The flesh lusts against the spirit by the rebellion of the passions against reason, which could not occur in the state of innocence. Reply Obj. 2. The human body was impassible in the state of innocence, as regards the passions which alter the disposition of nature, as will be explained later on, Question 97, Article 2. Likewise, the soul was impassible as regards the passions which impede the free use of reason. Reply Obj. 3. Perfection of moral virtue does not wholly take away the passions, but regulates them. For the temperate man desires as he ought to desire, and what he ought to desire, as stated in Ethics 3:11. Third Article, Part 1, Question 95, Article 3. Whether Adam had all the virtues? Objection 1. It would seem that Adam had not all the virtues, for some virtues are directed to curb passions. Thus immoderate concupiscence is restrained by temperance, and immoderate fear by fortitude. But in the state of innocence, no immoderation existed in the passions. Therefore neither did these virtues then exist. Objection 2. Further, some virtues are concerned with the passions which have evil as their object, as meekness with anger, fortitude with fear. But these passions did not exist in the state of innocence, as stated above, Article 2. Therefore neither did those virtues exist then. Objection 3. Further, penance is a virtue that regards sin committed. Mercy, too, is a virtue concerned with unhappiness. But in the state of innocence, neither sin nor unhappiness existed. Therefore neither did those virtues exist. Objection 4. Further, perseverance is a virtue, but Adam possessed it not, as proved by his subsequent sin. Therefore he possessed not every virtue. Objection 5. Further, faith is a virtue, but it did not exist in the state of innocence, for it implies an obscurity of knowledge which seems to be incompatible with the perfection of the primitive state. On the contrary, Augustine says, in a homily, Sermon against the Jews, quote, "The prince of sin overcame Adam, who was made from the slime of the earth to the image of God, adorned with modesty, restrained by temperance, refulgent with brightness." End quote. I answer that, in the state of innocence, man in a certain sense possessed all the virtues, and this can be proved from what precedes. For it was shown above, Article 1, that such was the rectitude of the primitive state, that reason was subject to God, and the lower powers to reason. Now the virtues are nothing but those perfections whereby reason is directed to God, and the inferior powers regulated according to the dictate of reason, as will be explained in the treatise on the virtues, Summa Theologica, first part of the second part, question 63, Article 2. Wherefore the rectitude of the primitive state required that man should in a sense possess every virtue. It must, however, be noted that some virtues of their very nature do not involve imperfection, such as charity and justice, and these virtues did exist in the primitive state absolutely, both in habit and in act. But other virtues are of such nature as to imply imperfection either in their act or on the part of the matter. If such imperfection be consistent with the perfection of the primitive state, such virtues necessarily existed in that state, as faith, which is of things not seen, and hope, which is of things not yet possessed. For the perfection of that state did not extend to the vision of the divine essence, and the possession of God with the enjoyment of final beatitude. Hence, faith and hope could exist in the primitive state, both as to habit and as to act. But any virtue which implies imperfection incompatible with the perfection of the primitive state could exist in that state as a habit, but not as to the act. For instance, penance, which is sorrow for sin committed, and mercy, which is sorrow for others' unhappiness, because sorrow, guilt, and unhappiness are incompatible with the perfection of the primitive state. Wherefore such virtues existed as habits in the first man, but not as to their acts, for he was so disposed that he would repent if there had been a sin to repent for, and had he seen unhappiness in his neighbor, he would have done his best to remedy it. This is in accordance with what the philosopher says, quote, "Shame, which regards what is ill done, may be found in a virtuous man, but only conditionally, as being so disposed that he would be ashamed if he did wrong." End quote. Ethics 4:9. Reply Obj. 1. It is accidental to temperance and fortitude to subdue superabundant passion, in so far as they are in a subject which happens to have superabundant passions, and yet those virtues are per se competent to moderate the passions. Reply Obj. 2. Passions which have evil for their object were incompatible with the perfection of the primitive state, if that evil be in the one affected by the passion, such as fear and sorrow. But passions which relate to evil in another are not incompatible with the perfection of the primitive state, for in that state man could hate the demon's malice, as he could love God's goodness. Thus the virtues which relate to such passions could exist in the primitive state, in habit and in act. Virtues, however, relating to passions which regard evil in the same subject, if relating to such passions only, could not exist in the primitive state in act, but only in habit, as we have said above of penance and of mercy. But other virtues there are which have relation not to such passions only, but to others, such as temperance, which relates not only to sorrow, but also to joy, and fortitude, which relates not only to fear, but also to daring and hope. Thus the act of temperance could exist in the primitive state, so far as it moderates pleasure, and in like manner fortitude, as moderating daring and hope, but not as moderating sorrow and fear. Reply Obj. 3 appears from what has been said above. Reply Obj. 4. Perseverance may be taken in two ways. In one sense, as a particular virtue, signifying a habit whereby a man makes a choice of persevering in good. In that sense, Adam possessed perseverance. In another sense, it is taken as a circumstance of virtue, signifying a certain uninterrupted continuation of virtue, in which sense Adam did not possess perseverance. Reply Objection 5 appears from what has been said above. Fourth Article, Part 1, Question 95, Article 4. Whether the actions of the first man were less meritorious than ours are. Objection 1. It would seem that the actions of the first man were less meritorious than ours are, for grace is given to us through the mercy of God, who succors most those who are most in need. Now we are more in need of grace than was man in the state of innocence. Therefore grace is more copiously poured out upon us. And since grace is the source of merit, our actions are more meritorious. Objection 2. Further, struggle and difficulty are required for merit, for it is written, 2 Timothy 2:5, quote, "He is not crowned except he strive lawfully," end quote. And the Philosopher says, Ethics 2:3, quote, "The object of virtue is the difficult and the good," end quote. But there is more strife and difficulty now. Therefore there is greater efficacy for merit. Objection 3. Further, the Master says, Book of Sentences 2, distinction 24, that, quote, "Man would not have merited in resisting temptation, whereas he does merit now when he resists," end quote. Therefore our actions are more meritorious than in the primitive state. On the contrary, if such were the case, man would be better off after sinning. I answer that merit as regards degree may be gauged in two ways. First, in its root, which is grace and charity. Merit thus measured corresponds in degree to the essential reward, which consists in the enjoyment of God. For the greater the charity whence our actions proceed, the more perfectly shall we enjoy God. Secondly, the degree of merit is measured by the degree of the action itself. This degree is of two kinds, absolute and proportional. The widow who put 2 mites into the treasury performed a deed of absolutely less degree than the others who put great sums therein. But in proportionate degree, the widow gave more, as our Lord said, because she gave more in proportion to her means. In each of these cases, the degree of merit corresponds to the accidental reward, which consists in rejoicing for created good. We conclude, therefore, that in the state of innocence, man's works were more meritorious than after sin was committed, if we consider the degree of merit on the part of grace, which would have been more copious as meeting with no obstacle in human nature. And in like manner, if we consider the absolute degree of the work done, because as man would have had greater virtue, he would have performed greater works. But if we consider the proportionate degree, a greater reason for merit exists after sin on account of man's weakness, because a small deed is more beyond the capacity of one who works with difficulty than a great deed is beyond one who performs it easily. Reply Objection 1. After sin, man requires grace for more things than before sin, but he does not need grace more, forasmuch as man even before sin required grace to obtain eternal life, which is the chief reason for the need of grace. But after sin, man required grace also for the remission of sin and for the support of his weakness. Reply Objection 2. Difficulty and struggle belong to the degree of merit according to the proportionate degree of the work done, as above explained. it is also a sign of the will's promptitude striving after what is difficult to itself, and the promptitude of the will is caused by the intensity of charity. Yet it may happen that a person performs an easy deed with as prompt a will as another performs an arduous deed, because he is ready to do even what may be difficult to him. But the actual difficulty, by its penal character, enables the deed to satisfy for sin. Reply Obj. 3. The first man would not have gained merit in resisting temptation, according to the opinion of those who say that he did not possess grace, even as now there is no merit to those who have not grace. But in this point there is a difference, inasmuch as in the primitive state there was no interior impulse to evil, as in our present state. Hence man was more able then than now to resist temptation even without grace. End of question 95.
Question 96 of Summa Theologica, Pars Prima on Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Summa Theologica, Pars Prima on Man, by Saint Thomas Aquinas, translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican Province. Question 96. Of the mastership belonging to man in the state of innocence, in 4 articles. We next consider the mastership which belonged to man in the state of innocence. Under this head there are 4 points of inquiry. 1. Whether man in the state of innocence was master over the animals. 2. Whether he was master over all creatures. 3. Whether in the state of innocence all men were equal. 4. Whether in that state man would have been master over man. First article of question 96. Whether Adam in the state of innocence had mastership over the animals. Objection 1. It would seem that in the state of innocence Adam had no mastership over the animals. For Augustine says, Genesis at Lim 9:14, that the animals were brought to Adam under the direction of the angels to receive their names from him. But the angels need not have intervened thus if man himself were master over the animals. Therefore, in the state of innocence, man had no mastership of the animals. Objection 2. Further, it is unfitting that elements hostile to one another should be brought under the mastership of one. But many animals are hostile to one another, as the sheep and the wolf. Therefore, all animals were not brought under the mastership of man. Objection 3. Further, Jerome says, the words quoted are not in St. Jerome's works. St. Thomas may have had in mind Bede Hexim as quoted in Glossa Ordinaria of Genesis 1:26. God gave man mastership over the animals, although before sin he had no need of them, for God foresaw that after sin animals would become useful to man. Therefore, at least before sin, it was unfitting for man to make use of his mastership. Objection 4. Further, it is proper to master the command, but the command is not given rightly save to a rational being. Therefore, man had no mastership over the irrational animals. On the contrary, it is written, Genesis 1:26, Let him have dominion over the fishes of the sea, and the birds of the air, and beasts of the earth, vulgate and whole earth. I answer that, as above stated, question 95, article 1, for his disobedience to God, man was punished by the disobedience of those creatures which should be subject to him. Therefore, in the state of innocence, before man had disobeyed, nothing disobeyed him that was naturally subject to him. Now, all animals are naturally subject to man. This can be proved in 3 ways. First, from the order observed by nature. For just as in the generation of things we perceive a certain order of procession of the perfect from the imperfect, thus matter is for the sake of the form, and the imperfect form for the sake of the perfect. So also is there order in the use of natural things. Thus the imperfect are for the use of the perfect, as the plants make use of the earth for their nourishment, and animals make use of plants, and man makes use of both plants and animals. Therefore, it is in keeping with the order of nature that man should be master over animals. Hence the philosopher says, Politics 1:5, that hunting of wild animals is just and natural, because man thereby exercises natural right. Secondly, this is proved by the order of divine providence, which always governs inferior things by the superior. Wherefore, as man, being made to the image of God, is above other animals, these are rightly subject to his government. Thirdly, this is proved from a property of man and of other animals. For we see in the latter a certain participative prudence of natural instinct in regard to certain particular acts, whereas man possesses a universal prudence as regards all practical matters. Now, whatever is participative is subject to what is essential and universal. Therefore, the subjection of other animals to man is proved to be natural. Reply Objection 1. A higher power can do many things that an inferior power cannot do to those which are subject to them. Now the angel is naturally higher than man. Therefore, certain things in regard to animals could be done by angels, which could not be done by men. For instance, the rapid gathering together of all the animals. Reply Objection 2. In the opinion of some, those animals which now are fierce and kill others would in that state have been tamed, not only in regard to men, but also in regard to other animals. This is quite unreasonable, for the nature of animals was not changed by man's sin, as if those whose nature now it is to devour the flesh of others would then have lived on herbs, as the lion and falcon. Nor does Bates' gloss on Genesis 1:30 say that trees and herbs were given as food to all animals and birds, but to some. Thus, there would have been natural antipathy between some animals. They would not, however, on this account have been accepted from the mastership of men, as neither at present nor they for that reason accepted from the mastership of God, whose providence has ordained all this. Of this providence man would have been the executor, as appears even now in regard to domestic animals, since fowls were given by men as food to the trained falcon. Reply Objection 3. In the state of innocence, man would not have had any bodily need of animals, neither for clothing, since then they were naked and not ashamed, there being no inordinate motions of concupiscence, nor for food, since they fed on the trees of paradise, nor to carry him about, his body being strong enough for that purpose. But man needed animals in order to have experimental knowledge of their natures. This is signified by the fact that God led the animals to man, that he might give them names expressive of their respective natures. Reply Objection 4. All animals by their natural instinct have a certain participation of prudence and reason, which accounts for the fact that cranes follow their leader and bays obey their queen. So all animals would have obeyed men of their own accord, as in the present state some domestic animals obey him. Second article of question 96. Whether man had mastership over all other creatures. Objection 1. It would seem that in the state of innocence man would not have had mastership over all other creatures, for an angel naturally has a greater power than man, but, as Augustine says, on the Trinity 3:8, corporeal matter would not have obeyed even holy angels, much less therefore would it have obeyed men in the state of innocence. Objection 2. Further, the only powers of the soul existing in plants are nutritive, augmentative, and generative. Now these do not naturally obey reason, as we can see in the case of any one man. Therefore, since it is by this reason that man is competent to have mastership, it seems that in the state of innocence man had no dominion over plants. Objection 3. Further, whosoever is a master of a thing can change it, but man could not have changed the course of the heavenly bodies, for this belongs to God alone, as Dionysius says. Therefore man had no dominion over them. On the contrary, it is written, Genesis 1:26, that he may have dominion over every creature. I answer that, man in a certain sense contains all things, and so according as he is master of what is within himself, in the same way he can have mastership over other things. Now we may consider four things in man: his reason, which makes him like to the angels; his sensitive powers, whereby he is like the animals; his natural forces, which liken him to the plants; and the body itself, wherein he is like to inanimate things. Now a man reason has the position of a master and not of a subject, wherefore man had no mastership over the angels in the primitive state. So when we read all creatures, we must understand the creatures which are not made to God's image. Over the sensitive powers, as the irascible and concupiscible, which obey reason in some degree, the soul has mastership by commanding. So in the state of innocence man had mastership over the animals by commanding them. But of the natural powers and the body itself man is master not by commanding, but by using them. Thus also in the state of innocence man's mastership over plants and inanimate things consisted not in commanding or in changing them, but in making use of them without hindrance. The answer to the objections appear from the above. The third article of question 96. Whether men were equal in the state of innocence? Objection 1. It would seem that in the state of innocence all would have been equal, for Gregory says, Moral 21, where there is no sin, there is no inequality. But in the state of innocence there was no sin, therefore all were equal. Objection 2. Further, likeness and equality are the basis of mutual love, according to Sirach 13:19. Every beast that loveth its like, so also every man him that is nearest to himself. Now in that state there was among men an abundance of love, which is the bond of peace. Therefore all were equal in the state of innocence. Objection 3. Further, the cause ceasing, the effect also ceases. But the cause of present inequality among men seems to arise on the part of God from the fact that he rewards some and punishes others, and on the part of nature from the fact that some, through a defect of nature, are born weak and deficient, others strong and perfect, which would not have been the case in the primitive state, therefore, etc. On the contrary, it is written, Romans 13:1, things which are of God are well ordered, vulgate, those that are ordained of God. But order chiefly consists in inequality, for Augustine says, The City of God 19:13, order disposeth things equal and unequal in their proper place. Therefore, in the primitive state, which was most proper and orderly, inequality would have existed. I answer that, we must needs admit that in the primitive state there would have been some inequality, at least as regards sex, because generation depends upon diversity of sex, and likewise as regards age, for some would have been born of others, nor would sexual union have been sterile. Moreover, as regards the soul, there would have been inequality as to the righteousness and knowledge, for man worked not of necessity, but of his own free will, by virtue of which man can apply himself more or less to action, desire, or knowledge. Hence, some would have made a greater advance in virtue and knowledge than others. There might also have been bodily disparity, for the human body was not entirely exempt from the laws of nature, so as not to receive from exterior sources more or less advantage and help, since indeed it was dependent on food wherewith to sustain life. So we may say that, according to the climate or the movement of the stars, some would have been born more robust in body than others, and also greater, and more beautiful, and always better disposed. So that, however, in those who were thus surpassed, there would have been no defect or fault either in soul or body. Reply Objection 1. By those words Gregory means to exclude such inequality as exists between virtue and vice, the result of which is that some are placed in subjection to others as a penalty. Reply Objection 2. Equality is the cause of equality in mutual love. Yet between those who are unequal there can be a greater love than between equals, although there be not an equal response. For a father naturally loves his son more than a brother loves his brother, although the son does not love his father as much as he is loved by him. Reply Objection 3. The cause of inequality could be on the part of God, not indeed that he would punish some and reward others, but that he would exalt some above others, so that the beauty of order would the more shine forth among men. Inequality might also arise on the parts of nature, as above described, without any defect of nature. The fourth article of question 96. Whether in the state of innocence man would have been master over men. Objection 1. It would seem that in the state of innocence man would not have been master over men, for Augustine says, The City of God 19:15, God willed that man, who was endowed with reason and made his image, should rule over none but rational creatures, not over men but over cattle. Objection 2. Further, what came into the world as a penalty for sin would not have existed in the state of innocence, but man was made subject to man as a penalty, for after sin it was said to the woman, Genesis 3:16, Thou shalt be under thy husband's power. Therefore, in the state of innocence, man would not have been subject to man. Objection 3. Further, subjection is opposed to liberty, but liberty is one of the chief blessings, and would not have been lacking in the state of innocence, where nothing was wanting that man's good will could desire, as Augustine says, The City of God 14:10. Therefore, man would not have been master over men in the state of innocence. On the contrary, the condition of men in the state of innocence was not more exalted than the condition of the angels, but among the angels some rule over others, and so one order is called that of the dominations. Therefore, it was not beneath the dignity of the state of innocence that one man should be subject to another. I answer that mastership has a twofold meaning. First, as opposed to slavery, in which sense master means one to whom another is subject as a slave. In another sense, mastership is referred in a general sense to any kind of subject, and in this sense even he who has the office of governing and directing free men can be called a master. In the state of innocence, man could have been a master for man, not in the former but in the latter sense. This distinction is founded on the reason that a slave differs from a free man in that the latter has the disposal of himself, as is stated in the beginning of the Metaphysics, whereas a slave is ordered to another. So that one man is master of another as his slave when he refers to one whose master he is, to his own, namely the master's use. And since every man's proper good is desirable to himself, and consequently it is a grievous matter to any one to yield another what ought to be one's own, therefore such dominion implies of necessity a pain inflicted on the subject, and consequently in the state of innocence such a mastership could not have existed between man and man. But a man is the master of a free subject, by directing him either towards his proper welfare or to the common good. Such a kind of mastership would have existed in the state of innocence between man and man, for two reasons. First, because man is naturally a social being, and so in the state of innocence he would have led a social life. Now a social life cannot exist among the number of people unless under the presidency of one to look after the common good. For many as such seek many things, whereas one attends only to one. Wherefore, the philosopher says, in the beginning of the Politics, that wherever many things are directed to one, we shall always find one at the head directing them. Secondly, if one man surpassed another in knowledge and virtue, would not have been fitting unless these gifts conduced to the benefit of others. According to the first book of Peter 4:10, as every man hath received grace, ministering the same one to another. Wherefore Augustine says, City of God 19:14, just men command not by the love of domineering, but by the service of counsel. And the City of God 15, the natural order of things requires this, and thus did God make man. From this appear the replies to the objections which are founded on the first mentioned mode of mastership. End of question 96.
Question 97 of Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on men. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Justin. Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on men, by Saint Thomas Aquinas, translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican Province. Question 97. Of the preservation of the individual in the primitive state, in 4 articles. We next consider what belongs to the bodily state of the first man. First, as regards the preservation of the individual. Secondly, as regards the preservation of the species. Under the first head, there are 4 points of inquiry. 1. Whether man in the state of innocence was immortal. 2. Whether he was impassible. 3. Whether he stood in need of food. 4. Whether he would have obtained immortality by the tree of life. The first article. Whether in the state of innocence man would have been immortal. Objection 1. It would seem that in the state of innocence man was not immortal, for the term mortal belongs to the definition of man. But if you take away the definition, you take away the thing defined. Therefore, as long as man was man, he could not be immortal. Objection 2. Further, corruptible and incorruptible are generically distinct, as the philosopher says, Metaphysics 10, Didascally 9:10. But there can be no passing from the one genus to another. Therefore, if the first man was incorruptible, man could not be corruptible in the present state. Objection 3. Further, if man were immortal in the state of innocence, this would have been due either to nature or to grace. Not to nature, for since nature does not change within the same species, he would also have been mortal now. Likewise, neither would this be owing to grace. For the first man recovered grace by repentance, according to Wisdom 10:2. He brought him out of his sins. Hence, he would have regained his immortality, which is clearly not the case. Therefore, man was not immortal in the state of innocence. Objection 4. Further, immortality is promised to man as a reward. According to Apocalypse 21:4, death shall be no more. But man was not created in the state of reward, but that he might deserve the reward. Therefore, man was not immortal in the state of innocence. On the contrary, it is written, Romans 5:12, by sin death came into the world. Therefore, man was mortal before sin. I answer that a thing may be incorruptible in 3 ways. First, on the part of matter, That is to say, either because it possesses no matter, like an angel, or because it possesses matter that is in potentiality to one form only, like the heavenly bodies. Such things as these are incorruptible by their very nature. Secondly, a thing is incorruptible in its form, inasmuch as being by nature corruptible, yet it has an inherent disposition which preserves it wholly from corruption, and this is called incorruptibility of glory. Because, as Augustine says, God made man's soul of such a powerful nature that from its fullness of beatitude there redounds to the body a fullness of health with the vigor of incorruption. Thirdly, a thing may be incorruptible on the part of its sufficient cause. In this sense, man was incorruptible and immortal in the state of innocence. For as Augustine says, God made man immortal as long as he did not sin, so that he might achieve for himself life or death. For man's body was indissoluble not by reason of any intrinsic vigor of immortality, but by reason of a supernatural force given by God to the soul, whereby it was enabled to preserve the body from all corruption so long as it remained self-subject to God. This entirely agrees with reason, for since the rational soul surpasses the capacity of corporeal matter, as above explained, question 76, article 1, it was most properly endowed at the beginning with the power of preserving the body in a manner surpassing the capacity of corporeal matter. Reply objection 1 and 2. These objections are founded on natural incorruptibility and immortality. Reply objection 3. This power of preserving the body was not natural to the soul, but was the gift of grace. And though man recovered grace as regards remission of guilt and the merit of glory, yet he did not recover immortality, the loss of which was an effect of sin. For this was reserved for Christ to accomplish, by whom the defective nature was to be restored into something better, as we shall explain further on. Reply objection 4. The promised reward of the immortality of glory differs from the immortality which was bestowed on man in the state of innocence. Second article. Whether in the state of innocence man would have been passible. Objection 1. It would seem that in the state of innocence man was passible, for sensation is a kind of passion, but in the state of innocence man would have been sensitive, therefore he would have been passible. Objection 2. Further, sleep is a kind of passion. Now man slept in the state of innocence according to Genesis 2:21. God cast a deep sleep upon Adam, therefore he would have been passible. Objection 3. Further, the same passage goes on to say that he took a rib out of Adam, therefore he was passible even to the degree of the cutting out of part of his body. Objection 4. Further, man's body was soft, but a soft body is naturally passible as regards a hard body. Therefore, if a hard body had come in contact with the soft body of the first man, the latter would have suffered from the impact. Therefore, the first man was passible. On the contrary, had man been passible, he would have been also corruptible, because, as the philosopher says, excessive suffering wastes the very substance. I answer that passion may be taken in two senses. First, in its proper sense, and thus a thing is said to suffer when changed from its natural disposition. For passion is the effects of action, and in nature contraries are mutually active or passive, according as one thing changes another from its natural disposition. Secondly, passion can be taken in a general sense for any kind of change, even if belonging to the perfecting process of nature. Thus understanding and sensation are said to be passions. In this second sense, man was passible in the state of innocence, and was passive both in soul and body. In the first sense, man was impassible both in soul and body, as he was likewise immortal. For he could curb his passion, as he could avoid death, so long as he refrained from sin. Thus, it is clear how to reply to the first two objections. Since sensation and sleep do not remove from man his natural disposition, but are ordered to his natural welfare. Reply objection 3. As already explained, question 92, article 3, at 2. The rib was in Adam as the principle of the human race, as the semen in man, who is a principle through generation. Hence, as man does not suffer any natural deterioration by seminal issue, so neither did he through the separation of the rib. Reply objection 4. Man's body in the state of innocence could be preserved from suffering injury from a hard body, partly by the use of his reason, whereby he could avoid what was harmful, and partly also by divine providence, so preserving him that nothing of a harmful nature could come upon him unawares. Third article. Whether in the state of innocence man had need of food. Objection 1. It would seem that in the state of innocence man did not require food, for food is necessary for man to restore what he has lost, but Adam's body suffered no loss, as being incorruptible, therefore he had no need of food. Objection 2. Further, Food is needed for nourishment, but nourishment involves passibility. Since then, man's body was impassible, it does not appear how food could be needful to him. Objection 3. Further, we need food for the preservation of life, but Adam could preserve his life otherwise, for had he not sinned, he would not have died. Therefore, he did not require food. Objection 4. Further, the consumption of food involves voiding of the surplus, which seems unsuitable to the state of innocence. Therefore, it seems that man did not take food in the primitive state. On the contrary, it is written, Genesis 2:16, of every tree in paradise ye shall eat. I answer that, in the state of innocence, man had an animal life requiring food, but after the resurrection, he would have a spiritual life needing no food. In order to make this clear, we must observe that the rational soul is both soul and spirit. It is called a soul by reason of what it possesses in common with other souls, that is, as giving life to the body, whence it is written, Genesis 2:7, man was made into a living soul, that is, a soul giving life to the body. The soul is called a spirit according to what properly belongs to the self and not other souls, as possessing an intellectual immaterial power. Thus, in the primitive state, the rational soul communicated to the body what belonged to itself as a soul, and so the body was called animal through having its life from the soul. Now, the first principle of life in these inferior creatures, as the philosopher says, is the vegetative soul, the operation of which are the use of food, generation, and growth. Wherefore, such operations befitted man in the state of innocence. But in the final state, after the resurrection, the soul will, to a certain extent, communicate to the body what properly belongs to the self as of spirit, immortality to everyone, impassibility, glory, and power to the good, whose bodies will be called spiritual. So, after the resurrection, man would not require food, whereas he required it in the state of innocence. Reply Objection 1. As Augustine says, how could man have an immortal body which was sustained by food, since an immortal being needs neither food nor drink? For we have explained, Article 1, that immortality of the primitive state was based on a supernatural force in the soul, and not on an intrinsic disposition of the body, so that by the action of heat, the body might lose part of its humid qualities, and to prevent the entire consumption of the humor, man was obliged to take food. Reply Objection 2. A certain passion and alteration attends nutriment on the part of the food changed into the substance of the thing nourished. So we cannot thence conclude that man's body was passible, but that the food taken was passible, although this kind of passion conduces to the perfection of the nature. Reply Objection 3. If man had not taken food, he would have sinned, as he also sinned by taking the forbidden fruit. For he was told at the same time to abstain from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and to eat of every other tree of paradise. Reply Objection 4. Some say that in the state of innocence man would not have taken more than necessary food, so that there would have been nothing superfluous, which, however, is unreasonable to suppose, as implying that there would have been no fecal matter. Wherefore there was need for voiding the surplus, yet so disposed by God as to be decorous and suitable to the state. Fourth article. Whether in the state of innocence man would have acquired immortality by the tree of life. Objection 1. It would seem that the tree of life could not be the cause of immortality, for nothing can act beyond its own species, as an effect does not exceed its cause. But the tree of life was corruptible, otherwise it could not be taken as food, since food is changed into the substance of the thing nourished. Therefore, the tree of life could not give incorruptibility or immortality. Objection 2. Further, effects caused by the forces of plants and other natural agencies are natural. If therefore the tree of life caused immortality, this would have been natural immortality. Objection 3. Further, this would seem to be reduced to the ancient fable that the gods by eating a certain food became immortal, which the philosopher ridicules. On the contrary, it is written, Genesis 3:22, lest perhaps he put forth his hand and take of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Further, Augustine says, a taste of the tree of life warded off corruption of the body, and even after sin man would have remained immortal, had he been allowed to eat of the tree of life. I answer that the tree of life in a certain degree was the cause of immortality, but not absolutely. To understand this, we must observe that in the primitive state man possessed, for the preservation of life, two remedies against two defects. One of these defects was the loss of humidity by the action of natural heat, which acts as the soul's instrument. As a remedy against such loss, man was provided with food, taken from the other trees of paradise, as now we are provided with food, which we take for the same purpose. The second defect, as the philosopher says, arises from the fact that the humor which is caused from the extraneous causes, being added to the humor already existent, lessens the specific active power. As water added to wine takes at first the taste of wine, then, as more water is added, the strength of the wine is diminished, till the wine becomes watery. In like manner, we may observe that at first the active force of the species is so strong that it is able to transform so much of the food as is required to replace the lost tissue, as well as what suffices for growth. Later on, however, the assimilated food does not suffice for growth, but only replaces what is lost. Last of all, in old age, it does not suffice even for this purpose, whereupon the body declines and finally dies from natural causes. Against this defect, man was provided with a remedy in the tree of life, for its effect was to strengthen the force of the species against the weakness resulting from the admixture of extraneous nutriment. Wherefore Augustine says, "Man had food to appease his hunger, drink to slake his thirst, and the tree of life to banish the breaking of old age." And the tree of life, like the drug, warded off all bodily corruption. Yet it did not absolutely cause immortality, for neither was the soul's intrinsic power of preserving the body due to the tree of life, nor was it of such efficiency as to give the body a disposition to immortality, whereby it might become indissoluble, which is clear from the fact that every bodily power is finite. So the power of the tree of life could not go so far as to give the body the prerogative of living from an infinite time, but only for a definite time. For it is manifest that the greater the forces, the more durable is its effect. Therefore, since the power of the tree of life was finite, man's life was to be preserved for a definite time by partaking of it once, and when that time had elapsed, man was to be either transferred to a spiritual life, or had need to eat once more of the tree of life. From this, the replies to the objections clearly appear. For the first proves that the tree of life did not absolutely cause immortality, while the others show that it caused incorruption by warding off corruption, according to the explanation above given. End of question 97, recording by Justin. Question 98, the Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on men. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.
Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on men, by Saint Thomas Aquinas, translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican Province.
Question 98. The preservation of the species, in 2 articles. We next consider what belongs to the preservation of the species, and first, of generation, secondly, of the state of the offspring. Under the first head, there are 2 points of inquiry: whether in the state of innocence there would have been generation, whether generation would have been through coition. First article, whether in the state of innocence generation existed. Objection 1.
It would seem there would have been no generation in the state of innocence.
For, as stated in Physics, Volume 5, corruption is contrary to generation, but contraries affect the same subject. Also, there would have been no corruption in the state of innocence. Therefore, neither would there have been generation. Objection 2. Further, the object of generation is the preservation in the species that which is corruptible in the individual. Wherefore, there is no generation in those individual things which last forever. But in the state of innocence, man would have lived forever. Therefore, in the state of innocence, there would have been no generation. Objection 3. Further, by generation man is multiplied, but the multiplication of masters requires the division of property, to avoid confusion of mastership. Therefore, since man was made master of the animals, it would have been necessary to make a division of rights when the human race increased by generation. This is against the natural law, according to which all things are in common. As
Isidore says,
Etymology, Volume 4, therefore, there would have been no generation in the state of innocence. On the contrary, it is written, Genesis 1:28, increase and multiply and fill the earth. But this increase could not come about save by generation, since the original number of mankind was 2 only. Therefore, there would have been generation in the state of innocence. I answer that, in the state of innocence, there would have been generation of offspring for the multiplication of the human race. Otherwise, man's sin would have been very necessary, for such a great blessing to be its result. We must, therefore, observe that man, by his nature, is established, as it were, midway between corruptible and incorruptible creatures, his soul being naturally incorruptible, while his body is naturally corruptible. We must also observe that nature's purpose appears to be different as regards corruptible and incorruptible things. for that seems to be the direct purpose of nature, which is invariable and perpetual, while what is only for a time is seemingly not the chief purpose of nature, but as it were subordinate to something else. Otherwise, when it ceased to exist,
nature's purpose would become void.
Therefore, since in things corruptible none is everlasting and permanent except the species, it follows that the chief purpose of nature is the good of the species, for the preservation of which natural generation is ordained. On the other hand, incorruptible substances survive, not only in the species, but also in the individual. Wherefore, even the individuals are included in the chief purpose of nature. Hence, it belongs to men to beget offspring, on the part of the naturally corruptible body. But on the part of the soul, which is incorruptible, it is fitting that multitude of individuals should be the direct purpose of nature, or rather of the author of nature, who alone is the creator of the human soul. Wherefore, to provide for the multiplication of the human race, he established the begetting of offspring even in the state of innocence. Reply Obj. 1. In the state of innocence, the human body was in itself corruptible, but it could be preserved from corruption by the soul. Therefore, since generation belongs to things corruptible, man was not to be deprived thereof. Reply Obj. 2. Although generation in the state of innocence might not have been required for the preservation of the species, yet it would have been required for the multiplication of the individual. Reply Obj. 3. In our present state, a division of possessions is necessary on account of the multiplicity of masters, inasmuch as community of possession is a source of strife, as the philosopher says, Politics 2:5. In the state of innocence, however, the will of men would have been so ordered that without any danger of strife they would have used in common, according to each one's need, those things of which
they were masters.
A state of things to be observed even now among many good men. Second article of question 98. Whether in the state of innocence there would have been generation by coition? Objection 1. It would seem that generation by coition would not have existed in the state of innocence, for, as Damascene says, the first man in the terrestrial paradise was like
an angel. But
in the future state of the resurrection, when men will be like the angels, they shall neither marry nor be married, as is written, Matthew 22:30. Therefore, neither in paradise would there have been generation by coition. Objection 2. Further, our first parents were created at the age of perfect development. Therefore, if generation by coition had existed before sin, they would have had intercourse while still in paradise, which was not the case according to Scripture, Genesis 4:1. Objection 3. Further, in carnal intercourse,
more than
at any other time, man becomes like the beasts, on account of the vehement delight which he takes therein. Whence contingency is praiseworthy, whereby man refrains from such pleasures. But man is compared to beasts by reason of sin, according to Psalms 48:13. Man, when he was in honor, did not understand. He is compared to senseless beasts, and is become like to them. Therefore, before sin, there would have been no such intercourse of man and woman. Objection 4. Further, in the state of innocence, there would have been no corruption. But virginal integrity is corrupted by intercourse. Therefore, there would have been no such thing in the state of innocence. On the contrary, God made man and woman before sin, Genesis 1:2. But nothing is void in God's works. Therefore, even if man had not sinned, there would have been such intercourse, to which the distinction of sex is ordained. Moreover, we are told that woman was made to be help to man, Genesis 2:18-20. But she is not fitted to help men except in generation, because another man would have proved a more effective help in anything else. Therefore, there would have been such generation also in the state of
innocence.
I answer that some of the earlier doctors, considering the nature of concupiscence as regards generation in our present state, concluded that in the state of innocence generation would not have been effected in the same way. Thus, Gregory of Nyssa says that in paradise the human race would have been multiplied by some other means, as the angels were multiplied without coition by the operation of the divine power. He adds that God made man male and female before sin, because he foreknew the mode of generation which would take place after sin, which he foresaw. But this is unreasonable, for what is natural to man was neither acquired nor forfeited by sin. Now it is clear that generation by coition is natural to man by reason of his animal life, which he possessed even before sin. As above explained, question 97, article 3, just as it is natural to other perfect animals, as the corporeal members make it clear. So we cannot allow that these members would not have had a natural use, as other members had before seen. Thus, as regards generation by coition, there are, in the present state of life, two things to be considered. One, which comes from nature, is the union of man and woman, for in every act of generation there is an active and passive principle. Wherefore, since wherever there is distinction of sex, the active principle is male and the passive is female, the order of nature demands that for the purpose of generation there should be concurrence of male and female.
The second thing to be observed
is a certain deformity of excessive concupiscence, which in the state of innocence would not have existed, when the lower powers were entirely subject to reason. Wherefore Augustine says, we must be far from supposing that offspring could not be begotten without concupiscence. Other bodily members would have been equally moved by the will, without ardent or wanton incentive, with calmness of soul and body. Reply Objection 1. In paradise, man would have been like an angel in his spirituality of mind, yet with an animal life in his body. After resurrection, man will be like an angel, spiritualized in soul and body, wherefore there is no parallel. Reply Objection 2. As Augustine says, our first parents did not come together in paradise, because on account of sin they were ejected from paradise shortly after the creation of the woman, or because, having received a general divine command relative to generation, they waited the special command relative to time. Reply Objection 3. Beasts are without reason. In this way man becomes, as it were, like them in coition, because he cannot moderate concupiscence. In the state of innocence, nothing of this kind would have happened that was not regulated by reason. Not because the delight of sense was less, as some say, rather indeed would sensible delight have been the greater in proportion to the greater purity of nature and the greater sensibility of the body, but because the force of concupiscence would not have so inordinately thrown itself into such pleasure, being curbed by reason, whose pace it is not to lessen sensual pleasure, but to prevent the force of concupiscence from cleaving to it immoderately. By immoderately, I mean going beyond the bounds of reason, as a sober person does not take less pleasure in food, taken in moderation, than the glutton, but his concupiscence lingers less in such pleasures. This is what Augustine means by the words quoted, which do not exclude intensity of pleasure from the state of innocence, but ardor of desire and restlessness of mind. Therefore, continence would not have been praiseworthy in the state of innocence, whereas it is praiseworthy in our present state. Not because it removes fecundity, but because it excludes inordinate desire. In that state fecundity would have been without lust.
Reply Objection 4.
As Augustine says, in that state intercourse would have been without prejudice to virginal integrity. This would have remained intact, as it does in the menses. And just as in giving birth the mother was then relieved, not by groans of pain, but by the instigation of maturity, so in conceiving, the union was one, not of lust for desire, but of deliberate action. End of question 98. Recording by Justin.
Question 99 Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on men. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on men, by Saint Thomas Aquinas, translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican Province. Question 99. Of the condition of the offspring as to the body.
We must now consider the condition of the offspring, first, as regards the body, secondly, as regards virtue, thirdly, in knowledge. Under the first head, there are 2 points of inquiry. First, whether in the state of innocence children would have had full powers of the body immediately after birth. Second, whether all infants would have been of the male sex. First article, whether in the state of innocence children would have had perfect strength of body as to the use of its members immediately after birth. Objection 1. It would seem that in the state of innocence children would have had perfect strength of the body as to the use of its members immediately after birth. For Augustine says, this weakness of the body befits their weakness of mind. But in the state of innocence there would have been no weakness of mind. Therefore, neither would there have been weakness of body in infants. Objection 2. Further, some animals at birth have sufficient strength to use their members, but man is nobler than other animals. Therefore, much more is it natural to man to have strength to use his members at birth, and thus it appears to be in punishment of sin that he has not that strength. Objection 3. Further, inability to secure a proper pleasure causes affliction. But if children had not full strength in the use of their limbs, they would often have been unable to procure something pleasurable offered to them, and so they would have been afflicted, which was not possible before sin. Therefore, in the state of innocence, children would not have been deprived of the use of their limbs. Objection 4. Further, the weakness of old age seems to correspond to that of infancy, but in the state of innocence there would have been no weakness of old age. Therefore, neither would there have been such weakness in infancy. On the contrary, everything generated is first imperfect, but in the state of innocence children would have been begotten by generation. Therefore, from the first they would have been imperfect in bodily size and power. I answer that, by faith alone do we hold truths which are above nature, and what we believe rests on authority. Wherefore, in making any assertion, we must be guided by the nature of things, except in those things which are above nature, and are made known to us by divine authority. Now it is clear that it is as natural as it is befitting to the principles of human nature that children should not have sufficient strength for the use of their limbs immediately after birth, because, in proportion to other animals, man has naturally a larger brain. Wherefore it is natural, on account of the considerable humidity of the brain in children, that the nerves which are instruments of movement should not be apt for moving the limbs. On the other hand, no Catholic doubts it possible for a child to have, by divine power, the use of its limbs immediately after birth. Now we have it on the authority of Scripture that God made man right, Ecclesiastes 7:30, which rightness, as Augustine says, consists in the perfect subjection of the body to the soul. As, therefore, in the primitive state it was impossible to find in the human limbs anything repugnant to man's well-ordered will, so was it impossible for those limbs to fail in executing the will's commands. Now the human will is well-ordered when it tends to acts which are befitting to man, but the same acts are not befitting to man at every season of life. We must, therefore, conclude that children would not have had sufficient strength for the use of their limbs for the purpose of performing every kind of act, but only for the acts befitting the state of infancy, such as suckling and the like. Reply Obj. 1. Augustine has spoken of the weakness which we observe in children even as regards those acts which befit a state of infancy, as is clear from his preceding remark that even when close to the breast and longing for it, they are more apt to cry than to suckle. Reply Obj. 2. The fact that some animals have the use of their limbs immediately after birth is due not to their superiority, since more perfect animals are not so endowed, but to the dryness of the brain, and to the operations proper to such animals being imperfect, so that a small amount of strength suffices them. Reply Obj. 3 is clear from what we have said above. We may add that they would have desired nothing except with an ordinate will, and only what was befitting to their state of life. Reply Obj. 4. In the state of innocence, man would have been born, yet not subject to corruption. Therefore, in that state there could have been certain infantile defects which result from birth, but not senile defects leading to corruption. Second article. Whether in the primitive state women would have been born. Objection 1. It would seem that in the primitive state woman would not have been born, for the philosopher says that woman is a misbegotten male, as though she were a product outside purpose of nature. But in that state nothing would have been unnatural in human generation. Therefore, in that state women would not have been born. Objection 2. Further, every agent produces its like, unless prevented by insufficient power or inaptness of matter. Thus a small fire cannot burn green wood, but in generation the active force is in the male. Since, therefore, in the state of innocence man's active force was not subject to defect, nor was there inept matter on the part of the woman, it seems that males would always have been born. Objection 3. Further, in the state of innocence, generation is ordered to the multiplication of human race, but the race would have been sufficiently multiplied by the first man and woman, from the fact that they would have lived forever. Therefore, in the state of innocence, there was no need for women to be born. On the contrary, nature's process in generation would have been in harmony with the manner in which it was established by God, but God established male and female in human nature, as it is written, Genesis 1:2. Therefore, also in the state of innocence, male and female would have been born. I answer that nothing belonging to the completeness of human nature would have been lacking in the state of innocence, and, as different grades belong to the perfection of the universe, so also diversity of sex belongs to the perfection of the human nature. Therefore, in the state of innocence, both sexes would have been begotten. Reply Objection 1. Woman is said to be a misbegotten male, as being a product outside the purpose of nature considered in the individual case, but not against the purpose of the universal nature. As above explained, Question 92, Article 1 and 2. Reply Objection 2. The generation of woman is not occasioned either by a defect of the active force or by inept matter, as the objection proposes, but sometimes by an extrinsic accidental cause. Thus the philosopher says, the northern wind favors the generation of males, and the southern wind that of females. Sometimes also by some impression in the soul of the parents, which may easily have some effect on the body of the child. Especially was this the case in the state of innocence, when the body was more subject to the soul, so that by the mere will of the parent, the sex of the offspring might be diversified. Reply Objection 3. The offspring would have been begotten to an animal life as to the use of food and generation. Hence, it was fitting that all should generate, and not only the first parents. From this, it seems to follow that males and females would have been in equal number. End of Question 99 of Summa Theologica, Pars Prima. Recording by Justin.
Question 100 of Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kevin Eves. Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on Man, by Saint Thomas Aquinas. Translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican Province. Question 100. Of the condition of the offspring as regards righteousness, in 2 articles. We now have to consider the condition of the offspring as to righteousness. Under this head there are 2 points of inquiry. 1. Whether men would have been born in a state of righteousness. 2. Whether they would have been born confirmed in righteousness. First Article 1, Question 100, Article 1. Whether men would have been born in a state of righteousness. Objection 1. It would seem that in the state of innocence men would have not been born in a state of righteousness. For, Hugh of St. Victor says in On the Sacraments 1, Before sin the first man would have begotten children sinless, but not heirs to their father's righteousness. Objection 2. Further, righteousness is effected by grace, as the Apostle says, Romans 5:16-21. Now grace is not transfused from one to another, for thus it would be natural, but is infused by God alone. Therefore children would not have been born in righteousness. Objection 3. Further, righteousness is in the soul, but the soul is not transmitted from the parent, therefore neither would righteousness have been transmitted from the parents to the children. On the contrary, Anselm says in On the Virginal Conception 10, As long as man did not sin, he would have begotten children endowed with righteousness together with the rational soul. I answer that, man naturally begets a specific likeness to himself, hence whatever accidental qualities result from the nature of the species must be alike in parent and child, unless nature fails in its operation, which would not have occurred in the state of innocence. But individual accidents do not necessarily exist alike in parent and child. Now original righteousness, in which the first man was created, was an accident pertaining to the nature of the species, not as caused by the principles of the species, but as a gift conferred by God on the entire human nature. This is clear from the fact that the opposites are of the same genus, and original sin, which is opposed to original righteousness, is called the sin of nature, wherefore it is transmitted from the parent to the offspring, and for this reason also the children would have been assimilated to their parents as regards original righteousness. Reply to Objection 1. These words of Hugh are to be understood as referring not to the habit of righteousness, but to the execution of the act thereof. Reply to Objection 2. Some say that children would have been born not with the righteousness of grace, which is the principle of merit, but with original righteousness. But since the root of original righteousness, which conferred righteousness on the first man when he was made, consists in the supernatural subjection of the reason to God, which subjection results from the sanctifying grace, as above explained, Question 95, Article 1, we must conclude that if children were born in original righteousness, they would also have been born in grace. Thus we have said above that the first man was created in grace, Question 95, Article 1. This grace, however, would not have been natural, for it would not have been transferred by virtue of the semen, but would have been conferred on man immediately on his receiving a rational soul. In the same way, the rational soul which is not transmitted by the parent is infused by God as soon as the human body is apt to receive it. From this the reply to the third objection is clear. Second Article 1, Question 100, Article 2. Whether in the state of innocence children would have been born confirmed in righteousness. Objection 1. It would seem that in the state of innocence children would have been born confirmed in righteousness. For Gregory says in Moral Poems 4, on the words of Job 3:13, "For now I should have been asleep," etc. If no sinful corruption had infected our first parent, he would not have begotten children of hell. No children would have been born of him but such as were destined to be saved by the Redeemer. Therefore all would have been born confirmed in righteousness. Objection 2. Further, Anselm says in Why God Became Man 1:18, "If our first parents had lived so as not to yield to temptation, they would have been confirmed in grace, so that with their offspring they would have been unable to sin any more. Therefore the children would have been born confirmed in righteousness." Objection 3. Further, good is stronger than evil. But by the sin of the first man there resulted in those born of him the necessity of sin. Therefore, if the first man had persevered in righteousness, his descendants would have derived from him the necessity of preserving righteousness. Objection 4. Further, the angels who remained faithful to God while the others sinned were at once confirmed in grace, so as to be unable henceforth to sin. In like manner, therefore, man would have been confirmed in grace if he had persevered, but he would have begotten children like himself. Therefore they also would have been born confirmed in righteousness. On the contrary, Augustine says in The City of God 1:14-10, "Happy would have been the whole human race, if neither they, that is our first parents, had committed any evil to be transmitted to their descendants, nor any of their race had committed any sin for which they would have been condemned." From which words we gather that even if our first parents had not sinned, any of their descendants might have done evil, and therefore they would not have been born confirmed in righteousness. I answer that it does not seem possible that in the state of innocence children would have been born confirmed in righteousness. For it is clear that at their birth they would not have had greater perfection than their parents at the time of begetting. Now the parents, as long as they begot children, would not have been confirmed in righteousness. For the rational creature is confirmed in righteousness through the beatitude given by the clear vision of God. And once it has seen God, it cannot but cleave to him who is the essence of goodness, wherefrom no one can turn away, since nothing is desired or loved but under the aspect of good. I say this according to the general law, for it may be otherwise in the case of special privilege, such as we believe was granted to the Virgin Mother of God. And as soon as Adam had attained to that happy state of seeing God in his essence, he would have become spiritual in soul and body, but his animal life would have ceased, wherein alone there is generation. Hence it is clear that children would not have been born confirmed in righteousness. Reply to Objection 1. If Adam had not sinned, he would not have begotten children of hell, in the sense that they would not contract from him his sin, which is the cause of hell. yet by sinning of their own free will they could have become children of hell. If, however, they did not become children of hell by falling into sin, this would not have been owing to their being confirmed in righteousness, but to divine providence preserving them free from sin. Reply to Objection 2. Anselm does not say this by way of assertion, but only as an opinion, which is clear from his mode of expression as follows: "It seems that if they had lived," etc. Reply to Objection 3. This argument is not conclusive, though Anselm seems to have been influenced by it, as appears from his words above quoted. For the necessity of sin incurred by the descendants would not have been such that they could not return to righteousness, which is the case only with the damned. Wherefore neither would the parents have transmitted to their descendants the necessity of not sinning, which is only in the blessed. Reply to Objection 4. There is no comparison between man and the angels, for man's free will is changeable, both before and after choice, whereas the angels is not changeable, as we have said above in the treating of the angels. Question 64, Article 2. End of Question 100. Recording by Kevin Eves.
Question 101 of Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by April Gonzalez. Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on man, by Saint Thomas Aquinas. Translated by the Fathers of English Dominican Province. Question 101. Of the condition of the offspring as regards knowledge, in 2 articles. We next consider the condition of the offspring as to knowledge. Under this head there are 2 points of inquiry. 1. Whether in the state of innocence children would have been born with perfect knowledge. 2. Whether they would have perfect use of reason at the moment of birth. First article. Question 101. Article 1. Whether in the state of innocence children would have been born with perfect knowledge. Objection 1. It would seem that in the state of innocence children would have been born with perfect knowledge, for Adam would have been begotten children like himself, but Adam was gifted with perfect knowledge. Question 94, Article 3. Therefore children would have been born with him with perfect knowledge. Objection 2. Further, ignorance is a result of sin, as Bede says, but ignorance is privation of knowledge. Therefore, before sin, children would have had perfect knowledge as soon as they were born. Objection 3. Further, children would have been gifted with a righteousness from birth. But knowledge is required for righteousness, since it directs our actions. Therefore they would have also been gifted with knowledge. On the contrary, the human soul is naturally like a blank tablet, on which nothing is written, as the philosopher says, de anima free, number 4. But the nature of the soul is the same now as it would have been in the state of innocence. Therefore the souls of children would have been without knowledge at birth. I answer that, above stated, question 99, article 1, as regards belief in matters which are above nature, we rely on authority alone, and so, when authority is wanting, we must be guided by the ordinary course of nature. Now it is natural for man to acquire knowledge through the senses, as above explained. Question 55, Article 2. Question 84, Article 6. And for this reason is the soul united to the body, that it needs it for its proper operation. And this would not be so if the soul were endowed at birth with knowledge not acquired through the sensitive powers. We must conclude, then, that in the state of innocence, children would have been born with perfect knowledge, but in course of time they would have acquired knowledge without difficulty by discovery or learning. Reply Objection 1. The perfection of knowledge was an individual accident of our first parent. So far as he was established as the father and instructor of the whole human race, therefore he begot children like himself, not in that respect, but only in those accidents which were natural, or confer gratuitously on the whole nature. Reply Obj. 2. Ignorance is privation of knowledge due at some particular time, and this would have been in the children from their birth. For they would have possessed the knowledge due to them at that time, hence no ignorance would have been in them, but only nescience in regard to certain matters. Such nescience was even in the holy angels, according to Dionysius. On the Heavenly Hierarchy, 7. Reply Obj. 3. Children would have had sufficient knowledge to direct them to deeds of righteousness, in which men are guided by universal principles of right, and this knowledge of theirs would have been much more complete than what we have now by nature, as likewise the knowledge of other universal principles. Second article. Question 101, Article 2. But the children would have had perfect use of reason at birth. Objection 1. It would seem that children would have had perfect use of reason at birth, for that children have not perfect use of reason in our present state is due to the soul being weighed down by the body, which was not the case in paradise, because, as it is written, the corruptible body is a load upon the soul. Wisdom, chapter 9, verse 15. Therefore, before sin and corruption which resulted therefrom, children would have had the perfect use of reason at birth. Objection 2. Further, some animals at birth have the use of their natural powers, as the lamb at once flees from the wolf. Much more, therefore, would men in the state of innocence have had perfect use of reason at birth. On the contrary, in all things produced by generation, nature proceeds from the imperfect to the perfect. Therefore children would not have had the perfect use of reason from the very outset. I answer that, as above stated, question 84, Article 7, that the use of reason depends in a certain manner on the use of sensitive powers. Wherefore, while these senses are tired and the interior sensitive powers hampered, man has not the perfect use of reason, as we see in those who are asleep or delirious. Now the sensitive powers are situated in corporeal organs, and therefore, so long as the latter is hindered, the action of the former is of necessity hindered also, and likewise, consequently, the use of reason. Now children are hindered in the use of these powers on account of the humidity of the brain, wherefore they have perfect use neither of these powers nor of reason. Therefore, in the state of innocence, children would not have had the perfect use of reason, which they would have enjoyed later on in life, yet they would have had a more perfect use than they have now, as to matters regarding to the particular state, as explained above regarding the use of their limbs. Question 99, Article 1. Reply Obj. 1. The corruptible body is load upon the soul, because it hinders the use of reason even in those matters which belong to man at all ages. Reply Obj. 2. Even other animals have not at birth such a perfect use of their natural powers as they have later on. This is clear from the fact that birds teach their young to fly, and the like may be observed in other animals. Moreover, a special impediment exists in man from humidity of the brain, as we have said above. Question 99, Article 1. End of question 101. Recording by April Gonzalez in Cavite, Philippines.
Question 102 of Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by K. Hand. Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on Man, by Saint Thomas Aquinas. Translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican Province. Question 102. Of man's abode, which is paradise, in 4 articles. We next consider man's abode, which is paradise. Under this head there are 4 points of inquiry. 1. Whether paradise is a corporeal place. 2. Whether it is a place apt for human habitation. 3. For what purpose was man placed in paradise? 4. Whether he should have been created in paradise. First article. Whether paradise is a corporeal place. Objection 1. It would seem that paradise is not a corporeal place, for Bede says that paradise reaches to the lunar circle. But no earthly place answers that description, both because it is contrary to the nature of the earth to be raised up so high, and because beneath the moon is the region of fire, which would consume the earth. Therefore, paradise is not a corporeal place. Objection 2. Further, Scripture mentions 4 rivers as rising in paradise, Genesis 2:10. But the rivers there mentioned have visible sources elsewhere, as is clear from the Philosopher, Meteorology 1. Therefore, paradise is not a corporeal place. Objection 3. Further, although men have explored the entire habitable world, yet none have made mention of that place of paradise. Therefore, apparently, it is not a corporeal place. Objection 4. Further, the tree of life is described as growing in paradise. But the tree of life is a spiritual thing, for it is written of wisdom that she is a tree of life to them that lay hold on her. Proverbs 3:18. Therefore paradise also is not a corporeal but spiritual place. Objection 5. Further, if paradise be a corporeal place, the trees also of paradise must be corporeal. But it seems they were not, for corporeal trees were produced on the 3rd day, while the planting of the trees of paradise is recorded after the work of the 6 days. Therefore paradise was not a corporeal place. On the contrary, Augustine says, the literal meaning of Genesis 8:1, 3 general opinions prevail about paradise. Some understand a place merely corporeal, others a place merely spiritual, while others, whose opinion I confess pleases me, hold that paradise was both corporeal and spiritual. I answer that, as Augustine says, The City of God 13:21, nothing prevents us from holding within proper limits a spiritual paradise, so long as we believe in the truth of the events narrated as having there occurred. For whatever Scripture tells us about paradise is set down as a matter of history, and wherever Scripture makes use of this method, we must hold to the historical truth of the narrative as a foundation of whatever spiritual explanation we may offer. And so paradise, as Isidore says, Entomologies 14:3, is a place situated in the east, its name being the Greek for garden. It was fitting that it should be in the east, for it is to be believed that it was situated in the most excellent part of the earth. Now the east is the right hand on the heavens, as the Philosopher explains, On the Heavens 2:2, and the right hand is nobler than the left, hence it was fitting that God should place the earthly paradise in the east. Reply Objection 1. Bede's assertion is untrue, if taken in its obvious sense. It may, however, be explained to mean that paradise reaches to the moon, not literally, but figuratively, because, as Isidore says, Entomologies 14:3, the atmosphere there is a continually even temperature, and in this respect it is like the heavenly bodies, which are devoid of opposing elements. Mention, however, is made of the moon rather than of other bodies, because of all the heavenly bodies the moon is nearest to us, and is, moreover, the most akin to the earth. Hence it is observed to be overshadowed by clouds so as to be almost obscured. Others say that paradise reached to the moon, that is, to the middle space of the air, where rain and wind and the like arise, because the moon is said to have influence on such changes. But in this sense it would not be a fit place for human dwelling, through being uneven in temperature, and not attuned to the human temperament, as is the lower atmosphere in the neighborhood of the earth. Reply Objection 2. Augustine says, the literal meaning of Genesis 8:7, it is probable that man has no idea where paradise was, and that the rivers, whose sources are said to be known, flowed for some distance underground, and then sprang up elsewhere. For who is not aware that such is the case with some other streams? Reply Objection 3. The situation of paradise is shut off from the habitable world by mountains or seas or some torrid region which cannot be crossed, and so people who have written about topography make no mention of it. Reply Objection 4. The tree of life is a material tree, and so called because its fruit was endowed with a life-preserving power as above stated, Question 97, Article 4. Yet it had a spiritual signification, as the rock in the desert was of a material nature, and yet signified Christ. In like manner, the tree of knowledge of good and evil was a material tree, so called in view of future events, because after eating of it, man was to learn, by experience of the consequent punishment, the difference between the good of obedience and the evil of rebellion. It may also be said to signify spiritually the free will, as some say. Reply, Objection 5. According to Augustine, the literal meaning of Genesis 5:5-8:3, the plants were not actually produced on the third day, but in their seminal virtues, whereas after the work of 6 days, the plants both of paradise and others were actually produced. According to other holy writers, we ought to say that all the plants were actually produced on the third day, including the trees of paradise, and what is said of the trees of paradise being planted after the work of the 6 days is to be understood, they say, by way of recapitulation. Whence our text reads, "The Lord God had planted a paradise of pleasure from the beginning." Genesis 2:8. Second article. Whether paradise was a place adapted to be the abode of man. Objection 1. It would seem that paradise was not a place adapted to be the abode of man, for man and angels are similarly ordered to beatitude. But the angels from the very beginning of their existence were made to dwell in the abode of the blessed, that is, the empyrean heaven. Therefore the place of man's habitation should have been there also. Objection 2. Further, if some definite place were required for man's abode, this would be required on the part either of the soul or of the body. If on the part of the soul, the place would be in heaven, which is adapted to the nature of the soul, since the desire of heaven is implanted in all. On the part of the body, there was no need for any other place than the one provided for other animals. Therefore paradise was not at all adapted to be the abode of man. Objection 3. Further, a place which contains nothing is useless. But after sin, paradise was not occupied by man. Therefore, if it were adapted as a dwelling place for man, it seems that God made paradise to no purpose. Objection 4. Further, since man is of an even temperament, a fitting place for him should be of even temperature. But paradise was not of an even temperature, for it is said to have been on the equator, a situation of extreme heat, since twice in the year the sun passes vertically over the heads of its inhabitants. Therefore, paradise was not a fit dwelling place for man. On the contrary, Damascene says, on the Orthodox Faith 2:11, paradise was a divinely ordered region, and worthy of him who was made to God's image. I answer that, as above stated, question 97, Article 1, man was incorruptible and immortal, not because his body had a disposition to incorruptibility, but because in his soul there was a power preserving the body from corruption. Now the human body may be corrupted from within or from without. From within, the body is corrupted by the consumption of the humors, and by old age, as explained above, question 97, Article 4. And man was able to ward off such corruption by food. Among those things which corrupt the body from without, the chief seems to be an atmosphere of unequal temperature, and to such corruption a remedy is found in an atmosphere of equable nature. In paradise both conditions were found, because, as Damascene says, on Orthodox Faith 2:11, paradise was permeated with the all-pervading brightness of a temperate, pure, and exquisite atmosphere, and decked with ever-flowering plants. Whence it is clear that paradise was most fit to be a dwelling place for man, and in keeping with his original state of immortality. Reply, Objection 1. The empyrean heaven is the highest of corporeal places, and is outside the region of change. By the first of these two conditions, it is a fitting abode for the angelic nature, for as Augustine says, on the Trinity 2, God rules corporeal creatures through spiritual creatures. Hence it is fitting that the spiritual nature should be established above the entire corporeal nature as presiding over it. By the second condition, it is a fitting abode for the state of beatitude, which is endowed with the highest degree of stability. Thus the abode of beatitude was suited to the very nature of the angel, therefore he was created there. But it is not suited to man's nature, since man is not set as a ruler over the entire corporeal creation. It is a fitting abode for man in regard only to his beatitude. Wherefore he was not placed from the beginning in the empyrean heaven, but was destined to be transferred thither in the state of his final beatitude. Reply, Objection 2. It is ridiculous to assert that any particular place is natural to the soul or to any spiritual substances, though some particular place may have a certain fitness in regard to spiritual substances. For the earthly paradise was a place adapted to man as regards both his body and his soul, that is, inasmuch as in his soul was the force which preserved the human body from corruption. This could not be said of the other animals. Therefore, as Damascene says, On the Orthodox Faith, 2:11, no irrational animal inhabited paradise. Although by a certain dispensation the animals were brought thither by God to Adam, and the serpent was able to trespass therein by the complicity of the devil. Reply Obj. 3. Paradise did not become useless through being unoccupied by man after sin, just as immortality was not conferred on man in vain, though he was to lose it. For thereby we learn God's kindness to man, and what man lost by sin. Moreover, some say that Enoch and Elias still dwell in that paradise. Reply Obj. 4. Those who say that paradise was on the equinoctial line are of the opinion that such a situation is most temperate on account of the unvarying equality of day and night, that it is never too cold there because the sun is never too far off, and never too hot because, although the sun passes over the heads of the inhabitants, it does not remain long in that position. However, Aristotle distinctly says, Meteorology 2:5, that such a region is uninhabitable on account of the heat. This seems to be more probable because even those regions where the sun does not pass vertically overhead are extremely hot on account of the mere proximity of the sun. But whatever be the truth of the matter, we must hold that paradise was situated in a most temperate situation, whether on the equator or elsewhere. Third article, whether man was placed in paradise to dress it and keep it. Objection 1. It would seem that man was not placed in paradise to dress and keep it, for what was brought on him as a punishment of sin would not have existed in paradise in the state of innocence. But the cultivation of the soil was a punishment of sin. Genesis 3:17. Therefore man was not placed in paradise to dress and keep it. Objection 2. Further, there is no need of a keeper when there is no fear of trespass with violence. But in paradise there was no fear of trespass with violence. Therefore, there was no need for man to keep paradise. Objection 3. Further, if man was placed in paradise to dress and keep it, man would apparently have been made for the sake of paradise, and not contrariwise, which seems to be false. Therefore, man was not placed in paradise to dress and keep it. On the contrary, it is written in Genesis 2:15, the Lord God took man and placed in the paradise of pleasure to dress and keep it. I answer that, as Augustine says, the literal meaning of Genesis 8:10, these words in Genesis may be understood in two ways. First, in the sense that God placed man in paradise that he might himself work in man and keep him by sanctifying him. For if this work cease, man at once relapses into darkness, as the air grows dark when the light ceases to shine, and by keeping man from all corruption and evil. Secondly, that man might dress and keep paradise, which dressing would not have involved labor as it did after sin, but would have been pleasant on account of man's practical knowledge of the powers of nature. Nor would man have kept paradise against a trespasser, but he would have striven to keep paradise for himself, lest he should lose it by sin. All of which was for man's good, wherefore paradise was ordered to man's benefit, and not conversely. Whence the replies to the objections are made clear. Fourth article, whether man was created in paradise. Objection 1. It would seem that man was created in paradise, for the angel was created in his dwelling place, namely the empyrean heaven. But before sin, paradise was a fitting abode for man. Therefore it seems that man was created in paradise. Objection 2. Further, other animals remain in the place where they are produced, as the fish in the water and the walking animals on the earth from which they were made. Now man would have remained in paradise after he was created. Question 97, Article 4. Therefore, he was created in paradise. Objection 3. Further, woman was made in paradise. But man is greater than woman. Therefore, much more should man have been made in paradise. On the contrary, it is written, Genesis 2:15, God took man and placed him in paradise. I answer that, paradise was a fitting abode for man as regards the incorruptibility of the primitive state. Now this incorruptibility was man's, not by nature, but by a supernatural gift of God. Therefore, that this might be attributed to God and not to human nature, God made man outside of paradise, and afterwards placed him there to live during the whole of his animal life, and having attained to the spiritual life, to be transferred thence to heaven. Reply Obj. 1. The empyrean heaven was a fitting abode for the angels as regards their nature, and therefore they were created there. In the same way I reply to the second objection, for those places befit those animals in their nature. Reply Obj. 3. Woman was made in paradise, not by reason of her own dignity, but on account of the dignity of the principle from which her body was formed. For the same reason the children would have been born in paradise, where their parents were already. End of question 102. End of Summa Theologica, Pars Prima, on Man, by Saint Thomas Aquinas, translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican Province.